Chapter 624. Ever since he started eating pills, ever since he obtained power, he still didn't know how to be satisfied. Ever since he wanted to live forever, he had fallen into this trap. The blood of a young girl was the best at prolonging one's life, but it could also make one addicted to the path of evil. There was blood in every pill the emperor took. As long as the master gave the order, that person would be nothing more than a tool in their hands. The night grew darker. In the inner courtyard of the palace, the shadows of the trees swayed. The emperor, dressed in bright yellow, sat in a dark corner. His expression could not be seen, but the blood at the corner of his mouth made him look gloomy. Eunuch Gao did not dare to raise his head to look through the barrier. He lowered his head in fear, and even his fingers were trembling. The emperor glanced at him, and his voice turned cold. "Did you see it?" Eunuch Gao froze and trembled all over. He said loudly, "This servant did not see anything." The emperor looked at him gloomily. "I like smart people the most. Since you did not see anything, then find me a few younger palace maids." But the recent situation in the palace. His Majesty is also aware of the situation in the palace. Eunuch Gao stammered. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva. If this continues, the Ministry of Appointments might find out everything. When that happens, it won't be good. Hearing this, the emperor suddenly became irritated. It's only a few palace maids who died, and those people from the Ministry of Appointments are not willing to let this matter go. They want to investigate. He was more afraid than anyone else that someone would know the details of this matter. The members of the imperial family were not allowed to cultivate the devil. This was a rule passed down by the ancestors. Although the retired emperor was not in the palace, his old subordinates still held some military power. He could not act rashly. If people found out that he drank human blood in order to achieve immortality, everything he had now would be taken away. He could not lose the throne, and he could not lose the power in his hands. He wanted immortality so much because he wanted to sit on this dragon throne forever. Even if he killed the retired emperor's trusted aides, the people would not allow a person who drank human blood to continue to be the emperor. Therefore, this secret was not known to anyone. He was so close. As long as he drank 3 more young and pure palace maids, he could complete the formation and achieve immortality. He had to think of a way to make those people from the Ministry of Appointments shut up. The emperor lowered his eyes and was deep in thought. Right at this moment, there was a sudden noise coming from the side of the barrier. The emperor's eyes immediately darkened as he looked in that direction. "Who is it?" The little one looked at the candlestick beneath his feet. His tiger-like eyes darkened. His body, which was about to run away, also paused. A chill ran down his spine. He only paused for a moment, then immediately ran out. He was still holding the fruit that he had just taken from outside. He took a bite and said in a dignified manner, "Imperial Father, it's me. I was hungry and couldn't find anything to eat, so I came to find Imperial Father." The emperor lowered his eyes and looked at the little one not far from him. His eyes darkened as if he was confirming something. Come to father." The little one's left hand, which was hidden under his long sleeve, clenched tightly, but his face was still as dignified as ever. Third brother had said it before. No matter what the situation was, just don't let the other party see your true emotions. That meant that there was a chance of victory in everything. At the thought of this, the little one held the dessert in his hand and walked toward the emperor as usual. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, that's enough. You don't have to come over. The emperor raised his lower lip and was very gentle. You can see clearly if you stand there. Didn't you hear anything when you were standing outside just now? The little one knew that the emperor was testing him. Third brother had also said that the emperor had to be 30% fake and 70% real before anyone would believe him. Just by saying that 70% was real, it was enough to dispel people's doubts. "I heard it." The little 7th prince held the dessert in his mouth and puffed up his cheeks. His tone was very cool. "I'm not deaf. Of course I can hear. Has Imperial Father been talking to Eunuch Gao all this time? What were you talking about? Was it about what to eat for breakfast tomorrow?" Eunuch Gao heard this and heaved a deep sigh of relief. He was really afraid that the little 7th prince would hear something at this critical juncture and say it out loud again. With His Majesty's current thoughts, if the little seventh prince really heard everything, he might not be able to keep his life. Fortunately. Eunuch Gao suppressed his shock. On the other side, the emperor also laughed. Do you think that everyone is like you who only knows how to eat? If you're hungry, go to the imperial kitchen and ask them to prepare something good for you. I'm tired too. You can go and rest. Yes. Can I take away the desserts outside? The little one acted as gluttonous as usual. The more he acted like this, the happier the emperor was. Of course you can. As long as he didn't hear anything, it was easy to talk about. Thank you, Imperial Father. The little one walked out in a dignified manner. When he stretched out his little paw, it was a little itchy. He reached out and scratched it. The emperor watched his movements with heavy eyes, and his gaze fell on the back of his hand. The little seventh prince had been practicing martial arts since he was young. Of course, he knew that the emperor was staring at him. It was like a snake staring at its prey. As long as the prey showed a little weakness, the snake would swallow it in one bite. The little one stood against the light. Her tiger-like eyes narrowed. Then, she grabbed all the pastries on the table and held them in her arms. She walked out of the bedroom unhurriedly and leisurely. Seeing that the little one had left, the emperor's face darkened. Send more people outside. No matter who it is in the future, no one is allowed to enter my bedroom as they please. Yes. Eunuch Gao trembled again. As expected, the emperor had the intention to kill just now. The emperor seemed to be thinking about something else. He asked, "Did you see the little one's hand just now?" "I saw it." Eunuch Gao replied respectfully. The seventh prince is still the same as when he was born. Once there is too much resentment around him, and it's cloudy, something will rise from his body. Other than the time when he was 1 year old, I haven't seen him reach out and scratch for many years. However, Your Majesty, don't worry. I believe that the seventh prince will recover in a few days. After hearing this, the emperor slowly narrowed his eyes. Scarlet began to spread from the corners of his eyes. Then tell me, did he hear what I said? The emperor's tone was very slow. Every word was filled with eerie coldness. Eunuch Gao's heart shrank again. I don't think so. Don't think so. The emperor turned his head and looked at himself in the bronze mirror. The bridge of his nose and the bloodstains on his lips. In an instant, the emperor's eyes narrowed. His voice was extremely eerie. No, he heard everything. He's just pretending that he didn't. Chapter 625. I've really underestimated him. How could a child who grew up with third prince only know how to eat? The emperor reached out and wiped the blood on his lips. His eyes were gloomy. Pass down the order. Say that the murderer, who killed the palace maids, has been found. Eunuch Gao suddenly paused. The murderer who killed the palace maids? That's right. The emperor curled his lips. The seventh prince's demonic nature has been revealed. He killed them to suppress his terrifying appetite. After I found out, he fled in panic. Write an imperial edict now and announce it to the world. Ask the Ministry of Personnel to investigate immediately. His matter could not be discovered by anyone, even if that person was his son. Moreover, this was an opportunity for him. As long as the Ministry of Personnel transferred all the suspicion to another person, he would be able to extricate himself from the whirlpool. As a son, it was only right for him to take the blame for his father. He would treat it as a return to his father for doting on him all these years. Once the imperial edict was sent out, no one would believe little Seven, even if he wanted to say anything. How could Eunuch Gao not understand the logic behind this? However, he had no other choice. The retired emperor and the royal family were not present. The person who made the decisions in the palace was the emperor after all. If he did not do as he was told, only death would await him. That night, the imperial edict was sent out. The entire patrol camp of the imperial army entered the palace. They were the emperor's personal guards. Usually when they were dispatched, it meant that something big was going to happen. The palace maids and eunuchs were whispering in panic. What's going on now? Don't you know? I heard that they're trying to catch the seventh prince. The people from the palace of heavenly purity leaked that the seventh prince was the one who killed the palace maids. That's impossible. Someone exclaimed. The seventh prince is such a cute child. How could he kill so many palace maids at such a young age? I'm not too sure about this, but it seems to be related to him becoming a demon. Don't you think that the seventh prince's appetite is much bigger than others? How could a child eat so much? However, the seventh prince has never felt full. Last time, he ran around with a goldfish in his mouth at Eunuch Sun's place, and was nagged for a long time by Eunuch Sunday. Tell me, which child would eat raw fish? Let's be more careful in the future. We haven't found the seventh prince yet. If he sets his eyes on us, we might even be sucked dry by him. Don't say any more, it's so scary. In the deep courtyard of the imperial palace, the noise gradually faded away. But it couldn't stop the situation from changing. Now the palace maids went out in groups. Even when they went to the toilet, they had to call someone with them, for fear of encountering an accident. The seventh prince's martial chi had always been amazing, so it was not that easy to capture him. The patrol camp sent thousands of people to conduct a carpet search of the imperial palace. East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate. Each gate was personally guarded by a revered teacher sent by the elder courtyard. Whether the seventh prince could be caught or not was another matter. But one thing was for sure, he should still be in the palace patter. Dong Song couldn't bear the weight of the snow. He lowered his head, and the snow fell on the little one's body. The little one curled up into a ball. His clothes were already soaked. The numbness and itchiness coming from his body, mixed with the sharp pain, made him want to scratch his body. However, the pain and itchiness didn't ease at all. Soon, a few scratches appeared on the back of his hand. The little one looked at the scratches on the back of his hand and frowned in pain. Then he leaned against the tree trunk. He originally wanted to look for his third brother. Halfway through, he realized that his third brother and third sister-in-law hadn't been around recently. Moreover, his third brother's place was definitely the most dangerous. On the contrary, if he hid in the palace of heavenly purity, he wouldn't be caught immediately. The little one dragged her tired body and moved her feet. She felt that every part of her body was burning hot, and she could not exert any strength in her limbs. He rubbed his stomach and took out a piece of pastry from his outer robe. He put it in his mouth and chewed twice with his head held high. He heard what the palace maids said. His imperial father was most likely going to push him out to be the scapegoat. After all, little Seven was different from Beligaju. When he realized this, his tiger eyes dimmed. He pouted and looked like he was about to cry. However, very soon he sniffed. His third brother said that a man shouldn't cry. He was such a manly man. He definitely couldn't ruin his image. However, he was still afraid. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the thing on his hand. The little one rubbed against it with all his might. It was inevitable that he felt a little wronged. He only liked to eat a little. He was so handsome. How did he look like a monster? The little one looked up and thought. He took another bite of the cold pastry in his hand and growled like a tiger cub. Third brother, where did you go? If he didn't come back, he would really be caught. He didn't want to go to the dungeon. The food there wasn't delicious at all. The little one gritted his teeth. He knew that it was useless to keep hiding here. He tried to circulate his chi a second time, but found that his limbs were still weak. Outside the west gate of the imperial palace was the sacrificial hall. Perhaps he could find Pervert lie there. However, there were many of his imperial father's people in the sacrificial hall. He had to be careful. The little one had never been like this before. Even when he walked, he was wobbling like a trapped beast that had lost its claws. Still haven't caught him. In the dark, the emperor's expression turned cold. Have you searched the third prince's chamber? The imperial guard with an iron mask cupped his hands and bowed. Your Majesty, we've searched everywhere. We still haven't found the seventh prince. What about the ministers in the Ministry of Civil Affairs? Did they receive news that the seventh prince knew a big secret and wanted to tell one of them? The emperor asked again. The imperial guard commander shook his head. No, but many of them don't believe that the seventh prince is the murderer of the palace maids. After all, it's ridiculous that he became a monster. Ridiculous? If they saw the seventh prince with their own eyes, they wouldn't say that. But this kid is really good at keeping his cool. He didn't make a move for so long. The emperor rubbed the blood stains on his fingertips. A normal child's first reaction after finding out about this was to ask for help. He had arranged so many people in the Ministry of Civil Affairs just to catch him. In the end, the emperor clenched his fists. The Imperial Guard commander suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Oh right, Your Majesty, we haven't searched the Palace of Heavenly Purity." Hearing this, the emperor's fingers paused. His eyes flashed with excitement. "Seal the Palace of Heavenly Purity immediately, and inform all ministers in the Ministry of Civil Affairs to put on their court robes and enter the palace. I want them to see for themselves whether the seventh prince is a human or a monster." Chapter 626. As soon as Hellion Vivian entered the palace, she noticed that something was amiss. The Elder Council had sent out too many Yin-Yang masters, and they hadn't left at all. It was as if they were searching for someone. "It seems that something has happened in the palace." Yuan Ming's sinister voice sounded from behind her. Such a strong aura of resentment. Did someone enter the path of evil? Hellion Vivian turned to the side and listened. Without hesitation, she grabbed a palace maid and asked, "What's going on?" "Third Princess Consort." The palace maid was startled at first, but then she immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. "This servant greets the third Princess Consort." Hellion Vivian reached out and pulled her back. "You don't need to kneel. Tell me first, what's going on? Why are there so many Yin-Yang masters here? Why you still don't know?" The palace maid looked at her in surprise, then she stammered. "The little seventh prince seems to be a demon. The emperor has already issued a decree to capture him." "Monster?" Hellion Wei furrowed her brows tightly. "Who said that?" The palace maid was startled by her tone. "This servant isn't too sure. I think the news came from the Palace of Heavenly Purity. It said that people have been dying in the palace recently, and all their blood has been sucked dry by the little seventh prince." Palace of Heavenly Purity. Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. Wasn't that where the old emperor lived? Moreover, she remembered that Yuan Ming had said that something wasn't quite right there. "Found him. We found the seventh prince." Suddenly, a commotion came from afar. Hellion Vivian's heart sank. Without thinking, she immediately followed the Yin-Yang masters. In the courtyard of the Palace of Heavenly Purity, hundreds of imperial guards surrounded a small firewood shed. The emperor and several officials from the Ministry of Appointments were standing outside. "Kick the door open," the emperor ordered in a deep voice. The officials from the Ministry of Appointments looked at each other. Finally, they couldn't help but ask, "Your Majesty, could this be a misunderstanding? The seventh prince is still so young. How could he kill people?" The emperor didn't say anything. The elder standing next to him sneered and said, "Lord Zhang, I think you've gone senile. The seventh highness is a monster. He will definitely kill people. What does age have to do with this?" As he spoke, he looked at the emperor and clenched his fists. "Your Majesty, I think we should use fire to smoke them out so that the ministers can see clearly." The ministers of the Ministry of Appointments were not prepared, and they were not as eloquent as the elders. In addition, the emperor's attitude was too obvious. There was nothing they could do. Could it be that he had to watch as the seventh prince was burned out by the fire? According to His Highness's character, if he knew about this in the future, none of them would be spared. But now they really had no other choice. "Someone come." "Fire." The elder raised his voice, his eyes flashing with fire. "Listen up, capture this monster alive." Yes, the Yin-Yang masters had just gotten into formation and were about to start the fire. Suddenly, a clear voice sounded, carrying a strong sense of oppression. "Who did you say is the monster?" The atmosphere instantly dropped to the freezing point. The aura of death felt like there was an invisible hand squeezing everyone's hearts. With a gentle twist, blood would splatter everywhere, and life would instantly turn into ashes. Then several bolts of lightning flashed across the sky, causing everyone's pupils to shrink. At that moment, everyone clearly saw a cold and incomparably beautiful face being clearly engraved by the light. It was Hellion Vivian. She walked over coldly like a ghost, and at the same time her hand moved. Snow and dust rolled up from the ground like a whirlwind, instantly suppressing the flames. The elder stood in the whirlwind, his face hurt from the wind. He reached out to block it, and narrowed his eyes. "Hellion Vivian." It's you again. Do you know what you're doing? Helian Weiwei slowly walked forward, her sleeves fluttering in the wind, as if she was an emissary from hell. Her pair of ice-cold eyes looked at that elder. I also want to ask you, elder, do you know what you're doing right now? Shao Qi has the blood of the imperial family flowing in his body. You're going against your superiors and burning him. What are you thinking? The elder was choked by her words and was momentarily speechless. The little eunuch beside the emperor saw his master nod and loudly shouted, Third Princess Consort. Everyone knows that you want to protect His Highness the Seventh Prince, but you can't protect him like this. Now that His Highness the Seventh Prince has become a monster and killed so many people in the palace, you actually asked the elder what he's thinking? You clearly want to protect the murderer. Are you speaking on behalf of yourself or His Majesty? Helian Weiwei leisurely cast her gaze over. The emperor frowned. The little eunuch was a shrewd person, so of course he wouldn't expose his master. He only loudly said, I'm speaking on behalf of all the dead palace maids. Kacha. A few sounds of wood breaking suddenly sounded in the air. There was still a raging fire above the head as it rolled to the side of the little eunuch's feet. The little eunuch jumped in fright. When he raised his head, he saw Weiwei looking at him. At this moment, her ink-black eyes were like the deep and serene ocean, yet her voice was calm. Say that again. The little eunuch froze and then shouted with a sharp voice. You won't let people speak the truth? His Highness the Seventh Prince is a monster. However, before he could finish his sentence, his body fell to the ground with a thud. Helian Vivian's foot stepped on his wrist. The wind that was blowing on her body suddenly became hot, as if it was burning holes in his body. What was even more terrifying was that he didn't know why he couldn't even make a sound. He could only silently twitch with his mouth open, as if the god of death had grabbed his throat. Who told you that those palace maids were killed by Shao Qi? Helian Vivian's voice was cold. A eunuch dares to slander a prince like this? He deserves to die. The emperor didn't think that Helian Vivian would be so bold as to make a move in front of him. His face couldn't maintain its calm, and his voice seemed to be forced out from his lips. Helian Vivian. However, Helian Vivian didn't give him a chance to speak. She immediately interrupted him with a salute. With a face full of loyalty she said, Your Majesty, your servant has helped you get rid of the traitor who wronged the Seventh Prince. Your Majesty, please don't blame your servant. The muscles on the emperor's face twitched in anger, but he couldn't do anything to Helian Vivian. Because if he did, it would be too obvious. It would be hard to avoid suspicion, so he could only expressionlessly say, Get up. Thank you, Your Majesty. Helian Vivian straightened her back. The elder sneered. No matter how good some people are at talking, this matter must be investigated clearly. As for whether the Seventh Prince is a monster or not, we can only decide after seeing him. Men, go knock on the door again. If no one answers, light a fire. However, at this time, Chapter 627. A creak was heard. The tightly shut wooden door of the firewood shed opened. Snow and dust rose into the air. The wind was so strong that it was difficult to open one's eyes. Amidst the swirling snow, a small gray figure could be seen walking out slowly. The little one still had his head down, so no one could see his expression clearly. He just kept walking with his head down. When the imperial guards closest to the firewood shed saw him, an indescribable fear suddenly appeared on their faces. Their eyes slowly widened, and all of them took a step back. Seeing this, the elder immediately scolded them. What are you doing? Hurry up and catch him first. The imperial guards looked at the emperor and the rest in fear. They couldn't move at all, let alone speak. It was as if there was an unknown force choking their throats. From the moment the Seventh Prince appeared, they knew that something was wrong. The little one continued to walk forward. An unknown airflow was stirring up in his body. His whole body was itchy and painful. It was as if there was a swarm of little insects in his blood, clamoring to break out of their shells. The back of his hand was itching badly, and his forehead was burning hot. He couldn't stay in the woodshed any longer. He just wanted to eat, but he didn't want to admit that he was a monster. He imitated Third Brother and coldly looked at the imperial guards. His eyes were cold. Scram! If they didn't scram, he would trample them flat. However, just as he took a step, a pentagram shape appeared under his feet. It floated in 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. It fell from the sky like a net and covered the 7th prince's head, emitting a faint glow. It was copper wire, a formation that was set up early on. The elder laughed and said proudly, "7th prince, this is the most secure formation in the world. It can force all demons and ghosts to reveal their true forms until they are subdued. I advise you not to resist, otherwise, you will be the one who gets hurt." The little one frowned, stretched out his arms, and moved them left and right. The net-like copper wires immediately tightened around the little one. Wounds appeared on the back of the little one's fair hands. Blood flowed from his fingertips and dripped onto the ground. This time, the little one didn't even move. Big tiger eyes stared at his feet. When the light came into contact with his skin, it was as if he was being burned. His eyes gradually lost their original luster, and he looked like a withered little tiger. However, there was something that made people feel uneasy. Hellion Vivian clenched her hands in heartache. Yuan Ming, break the formation. Now, Yuan Ming raises his eyebrows and says in an evil tone, "Breaking the array in front of so many people is tantamount to shedding all pretense of cordiality. The emperor will definitely say that you are rebelling and arrest you, and that little brat together. Are you sure?" Hellion Vivian sneered. "I am sure. There is no reason for me to hold back and care about face when others bully our little 7. If I want to rebel, then so be it." After saying that, she didn't waste time. She pointed her finger, and the wind and clouds surged. The sound of a silver knife cutting through the wind was heard as it shot towards the Yin-Yang masters, who were controlling the formation. The Yin-Yang masters were thrown into chaos, and their formation changed. A trace of anger flashed in the elder's eyes. He roared, "Imperial guards, arrest this rebellious girl, who dares to use a knife in front of the emperor." The imperial guards looked at the emperor, who was standing in the distance. When they saw that he didn't object, they immediately raised the bows in their hands. All the arrows were aimed at Hellion Vivian, who was standing in front of the little one. Hellion Wei Wei's figure moved, as she propped up a black folding umbrella between her fingers. Large snowflakes fell down and hit the surface of the umbrella. The handle of the umbrella flew and blocked the arrows that were shot over one by one. Hellion Vivian, the emperor, who had been silent all this time, suddenly raised his voice and looked at her gloomily. "Are you trying to rebel?" Facing such an accusation, Hellion Vivian stood straight and smiled with delicate features. With a calm and languid voice, she said slowly, "Wei Wei doesn't dare. But isn't your majesty a little too impatient this time? Little 7 is your son, and there is no evidence to prove that little 7 was the one who killed those palace maids. You are forcing him like this. Are you really trying to find out who the murderer is?" "I don't think so." "What do you mean by that? Are you accusing me?" The emperor's eyes flashed red. "Seeing that you are a loyal person, I have forgiven your insolence many times. Now you dare to accuse me? Good, very good. Arrest this Hellion Vivian as well, and throw her into prison." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at the soldiers who were rushing over. Her gaze landed on the ministers of the Ministry of Appointments, and she suddenly raised her voice. These palace maids were summoned to the Palace of Heavenly Purity before they died. When they were found again, all the blood in their bodies had been sucked dry. Only a dried husk was left, and it was covered by the seaweed at the bottom of the river. If the river and the palace hadn't risen and drowned their corpses, many of the clues would not have been lost. It is because of the murderer's cover-up that the ministers have so much trouble solving the case. Speaking of the river and the palace, aren't the ministers curious? It is clearly winter and there is less rain, so why did the river rise? That is because you are misleading the public with your lies. Without waiting for Hellion Wei Wei to finish speaking, the emperor interrupted her. His eyes were filled with hostility. "Hellion Wei Wei, I've given you a chance. Since you don't have the slightest intention of repentance, then I don't need to show you any mercy. Archers, get ready." Hellion Vivian's eyes swept across the flaming bows and arrows. She slowly tightened her grip on the black umbrella, afraid that one of the arrows would hit Xiao Qi. One of the ministers of the Ministry of Appointments cupped his hands and pleaded, "Your Majesty, why don't you listen to the third princess consort? Perhaps her words will be useful." The emperor's facial muscles trembled again. His voice was cold. "What? Elderly also wants to rebel?" "This old minister doesn't dare, but—" Elderly still wanted to say something. The emperor sneered and said, "What can a lawless woman like her say? What can I say? I think you have all followed the third prince for too long, and want to rebel." After being scolded by the emperor, the minister's voice trembled. "This old minister didn't mean that. Elderly, I don't care what you mean. From now on, whoever pleads for leniency for that unfilial daughter will be punished according to the law." The emperor didn't give Helene Vivian any chance to speak. He couldn't let her speak anymore. This woman could actually guess so many things. Although she didn't say the key point, the spearhead was pointed at the palace of heavenly purity. If he let her continue, the matter of the river would be exposed. At that time, he would inevitably be suspected. Therefore, such a person must not be allowed to live. Chapter 628. The emperor's attitude was firm. The ministers could only worry helplessly. No less than hundreds of rocket launchers surrounded Helene Weiwei in the center. The little one behind her was already bent over. Just by looking at his posture, one could imagine how painful it would be. "Rise!" The leader of the imperial army raised his hand. A swoosh was heard. The flaming arrows were raised and shone on the little one's face. "Wait a minute. Look. Look at what's on his body." The archer closest to the little one suddenly screamed. His finger trembled as he pointed at the little figure. His voice was filled with fear. The ministers, led by the elder, all looked at the little one. They could not help but be shocked. Little Seven's face was covered with scales. As the flames shone on his skin, the scales spread and covered his forehead. At this moment someone suddenly shouted, "Monster!" Then, the people scattered in fear and wanted to hide as far away as possible. Their gazes on the little one were filled with disgust and fear. They looked at little Seven, as if they were looking at a monster. The little one, who was already tormented by the pain, started to look around helplessly when he saw the reactions of the crowd. Even breathing seemed to be painful. "Little Seven." Helene Vivian looked back at the little one while dealing with the rocket launchers. She lowered her voice and said, "Hang in there for a while more." The little one could not move. He could only feel that something strange was expanding in his body. When he looked down, the back of his hand was covered with a thin layer of fur. When the elder saw this, he added fuel to the fire. "Third princess consort, what else do you have to say? Look at the person behind you. Is he still our seventh prince? He's obviously a monster that's about to take shape." Little Seven felt like his head was about to split open. When he heard the elder's words, he shouted angrily, "You're the monster! Come over here if you have the ability. See if I don't tear you apart." Helene Weiwei had never seen little Seven so irritable before. Under normal circumstances, no matter how angry he was, he would not say such things. He would only walk over and kick people a few times. But now he was in such a state where his whole body was filled with hostility. It was a bit unusual. "He's going to transform." Yuan Ming, who was observing this scene, suddenly opened his mouth and said to Helene Vivian in a low voice, "Look at his eyes, they are starting to be dyed with color. The resentment in the surroundings is so deep. If its owner doesn't appear, and it is allowed to transform into its beast form, not only will the entire palace be destroyed, it will also self-destruct." Hearing this, Helene Weiwei suddenly narrowed her eyes, turned around, and hugged the little one, who was in great pain, into her arms. Little Seven raised his head and looked at the person who held him in his arms. He tried his best to distinguish the person's appearance. He didn't understand why there were still people who dared to approach him. Weren't they monsters? "Little Seven, wake up." Helene Vivian looked at the little one and held his shoulders with both hands. "Listen, don't let your anger control you. You know that your third brother doesn't like to see people lose their rationality." "Third brother?" The scarlet in the little one's eyes weakened a little. He subconsciously tilted his head, and a fire arrow shot towards them. Helene Vivian blocked it with her umbrella. The silver knife in her right hand flew out of her palm and flew straight towards the Imperial Guard's leader. That person was shocked and immediately defended, his palm firmly pressed against one end of the saber hilt. A layer of skin was abruptly scraped off by the thick martial chi. Hellion Vivian didn't give him any time to react. With a flip of her hand, she grabbed the Imperial Guard's commander who gave the order. Her fingers tightened around the commander's throat, and she exerted force. Creak. The person who gave the order was dead. The fire arrow became chaotic and was no longer as strong as before. This gave the little one some space to calm down. However, the selfish emperor had already made up his mind to kill. He turned his head and glanced at the elder. That elder understood the emperor's intention and ordered loudly, "Yin-Yang Masters, continue the formation." The Yin-Yang Masters nodded. They raised their index fingers and pulled hard. The formation was formed again. Under the light, the pain in his body became more and more intense. Little Seven stared blankly at the people who were moving further and further away from him. He felt that this scene was very familiar. It seemed that he had been treated like this before in his memory. At that time, it seemed like someone had disappeared. His stomach was very, very hungry. However, he clearly knew that no one would feed him anymore. Also, no one would touch his head and ask him to take a bath in the river. He climbed to the top of the mountain and wagged his tail, wanting to find that person. In his memory, that person had always liked to be clean. He had a faint smile on his face and beautiful thin lips, just like third brother. However, no matter how dirty he made himself, that person still didn't appear. The villagers at the foot of the mountain raised the torches in their hands and looked at him in horror. They wanted to burn him to death. They shouted that he was a monster and threw stones at him. Those things didn't hurt him at all. However, he felt very uncomfortable. He wanted to tell those people that he wasn't a monster. He was here to find his master. His master was missing, and they didn't see him. Then what happened then? Little Seven reached out his hand and grabbed downwards. Later, he found out that those people had killed his master. He wanted to take revenge. He wanted to tear them all to pieces. Ah! The little one raised his head. The faint golden circle around his eyes suddenly shone brightly and covered his entire eyes. From afar, they looked like two golden ambers. They were especially bright in the dusky sky. This made the people around him even more frightened. They screamed even more shrilly. What is that? A monster. Little Seven Prince is really a monster. Seeing this scene, even the officials of the Ministry of Personnel, who had just pleaded for Little Seven, cried out in fear. The emperor was satisfied. This was what he wanted to see. Whether the Yin-Yang Masters came or not, a layer of scales would grow on Little Seven's body. This was something that he had been with since birth. He didn't expect that the Yin-Yang Masters array would have such a great effect. It could make him grow hair all over his body. Although things were a little out of his expectations, it seemed that the result was better. This time, no one would say things like, "The seventh prince is still young and definitely can't be a murderer," because the characteristics of a monster on his body said everything. Chapter 629. Fire the arrows. Another group of Imperial Guards rushed over. Hellion Vivian used the umbrella as a pivot, and her body floated in the air. As her robes fluttered, countless rays of light surged out from behind her, forming a huge current of air. Together with her bleeding finger that she had bitten, she shouted the word break. The golden string was broken into pieces, and the formation was gone. The Yin-Yang Masters were forced to take a step back from the impact. Looking at the person who fell to the ground, he reached out and clutched his chest. Hellion Vivian was also injured. It was inevitable that her finger would be injured by the flying arrows. If she was alone, it would be easy for her to escape and fight. But she still had to protect Little Seven. Wave after wave of Imperial Guards rushed over. Hellion Vivian's face was covered in ashes, but her eyes were frighteningly bright. The Imperial Guards had never met such a difficult opponent. One person against a group of them, but they didn't retreat at all. They even began to doubt whether they could still capture the seventh prince. The emperor looked at Hellion Vivian, who was blocking in front of him, and directly ordered people to bring oil barrels. He spread them in a circle and prepared to attack with fire. What's that smell? As they were fighting, Yuan Ming suddenly spoke. Hellion Vivian's nose twitched, and her eyes darkened. She was smart enough to immediately guess the other party's intentions. They planned to attack with fire. Little White, come out and carry Little Seven away first. If I could carry him, I would have done so already. The beast aura on his body has already affected me. I can't show myself at all. I'm afraid I'll go berserk. Little White's voice became lower and lower. Also, his condition isn't good. Just a little bit of blood will cause him to completely lose control. As they spoke, there was a loud boom. A huge fire was ignited and spread in a circle. The little person's hand was hanging down in the flames, and his fingernails were gradually dyed black. The Yin-Yang masters looked at the abnormally quiet little person in the flames. Their expressions gradually changed, and sweat appeared on their foreheads. Not good, he's going to go berserk. Once a monster goes berserk, it will become very difficult to control. It will completely lose its mind and suck everyone's blood dry. But in reality, they had lived for so many years, and had never encountered a monster that went berserk. Firstly, it was because low-level monsters did not have the qualifications to go berserk. Secondly, when low-level monsters cultivated into high-level monsters, they would learn to suppress themselves, and would not easily go berserk. However, the current situation was not within their expectations. They originally thought that since the other party was so young, even if it was a monster, it would be very easy to deal with. They had never expected that the other party would actually go berserk. This was completely different from what they had expected. Perhaps it was because it had dragged on for too long. The Yin-Yang masters' eyes darkened. They took out yellow talismans, and used their minds to communicate with the people in the distance. Young master, what should we do now? Get rid of him before he goes berserk. A voice as gentle as jade transmitted over, neither deep nor shallow, carrying a thick cough. Be careful of Hellion Wei Wei, separate her. Yes, young master. The Yin-Yang masters held the golden threads in their hands, and moved in unison, forming the 5 elements 8 trigrams formation. He couldn't afford to make the slightest mistake. He had to succeed in one strike. They are planning to use a vicious move. Yuan Ming reminded Hellion Vivian in a low voice. They should want to get rid of him, before Little Seven transforms. Hellion Vivian's hand paused and blood flowed out. Yuan Ming, does the agreement you made before still count? You know eh? Yuan Ming's eyes were deep like the deep sea. You want to give your essence to me for a little brat? Hellion Vivian moved to the side, and slit the throat of the Imperial Guard that pounced on her. Her delicate little face was dyed red. He is not a normal little brat. He is Beligage's little brother. Before he returns, I will protect anything that belongs to him for him. Moreover, that is Little Seven. Yuan Ming did not speak. His handsome face revealed an evil aura. As a demon, of course I want to obtain your essence. Because only by signing the contract of eternal life could he recover his original abilities and remember the memories he had lost. Master. In the middle of the palace, the little person with a gourd on her back stood on the blue tiles. She slowly threw resentment into the air. Is it about time? Jing Wushuang looked at the flames in the distance and nodded. She lifted her finger and chanted. The black resentment that was rising was like countless black pythons that were entangled together and slowly wriggled. It turned into human faces one after another, rising from the layers of black gas. The ugly and twisted faces were squeezed together. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were numb, and some were excited. There were no eyes or noses, only a black hole-like mouth that was tearing. There was a sharp and hoarse breathing sound coming from it. It flew towards the 2 people in the fire circle. Looking at those things, the elder knew that the master had come. His eyes were filled with unconcealable excitement. As long as the master made a move, this Hellion Vivian and Little Seven would definitely be dead. The little person felt the thicker resentment from the outside world. Her originally round fingernails became sharp and long. Her blood-red eyes widened to the extreme. What are those? This time the people were really scared. They had never seen such a scene before, so they all showed a frightened expression. They thought that those black little faces were emerging from Little Seven's body. Their fingers trembled as they shouted, Your Majesty. The emperor did not expect such a situation, but for some reason, he felt comfortable from the inside. Especially when the black mist hit his body, he felt like he had drunk enough blood. It's the resentment array woman. The other party still hasn't given up on the idea of taking your body. Whitey's voice rang out from the fantasy space. It turned out that Jing Wushuang knew from the beginning that these stupid humans would not be able to deal with Hellion Vivian. That person had never been an ordinary woman. Even if she entered the palace alone, it would make things very difficult. However, this was nothing to Jing Wushuang. What she wanted to do from the beginning was to awaken an Ifeng's reincarnation. Now was undoubtedly the best time. She had someone to protect, so she would not fight with all her might. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes. Once an Ifeng woke up, those who bullied Hellion Vivian in the palace would not have a good ending. He would not allow others to besiege her while he did nothing. There was a loud crash. Hellion Vivian was surrounded by small faces. A layer of sticky film that was invisible to the naked eye slowly wrapped around her body. It started from her ankles, followed her calves to her waist, and wrapped around her chest. Chapter 630. Hellion Vivian felt as if her body was being gnawed by something. The black fog blocked out all the light in front of her. His body was exhausted to the extreme, and even his feet felt weak. Those pitch-black faces were everywhere, seeping into the fog. The little one looked at the person in front of him, who was covered by the black fog. His large eyes were filled with blood. Hatred tore his last bit of rationality to shreds. He clenched his small hands and roared towards the sky. Hearing the little one's roar, Hellion Weiwei, who had fallen into exhaustion, moved her wounded finger. The finger was hanging by her side, the blood dripping from it seeped into the ground. With my life, I call upon your name. Master that woman. The little one on the gourd froze, alerted that his movement was being hindered. He opened his eyes wide. What is she doing? Jing Wushuang did not speak, but the dream demon who was standing beside him rolled his eyes quickly. She's chanting, she's chanting. But once the array is formed, she can no longer use her magic. The little one furrowed his brows. No, it's not magic. The dream demon moved, as if he was afraid of something. Jing Wushuang narrowed his eyes and coughed heavily. Hellion Weiwei, who was oblivious to all of this, only heard a low chuckle by her ear. That chuckle was full of magnetism, like golden gravel, slowly flowing out. Do you know that once you sell your soul, you will never be able to pass through the door of God, and will never be reincarnated? Light and shadow spun in front of her eyes, and there was a faint fragrance in her nose. Red spider lilies bloomed under her feet one after another, like flowing blood. Legend has it that the red spider lilies only bloomed on the road to hell. If I cared about the next life, I wouldn't have summoned you. Hellion Vivian floated in mid-air, and black fog flowed out from her fingertips. That was the lifeline that could summon demons the moment they were born. The low chuckle had an indescribable evil charm, like Yuan Ming's, but also not like Yuan Ming's. It was as if someone was merging with him, becoming a whole. Black feathers fell from the sky one by one. They were soft and beautiful, just like a scene from a comic book. I'll ask you one more time. Are you really willing to sell me your soul? Before Hellion Vivian regained consciousness, she spat out a few words. Shut up. Use my soul in exchange for my spirit. Demon, show yourself. As the last sentence of the incantation left her mouth, she fell completely unconscious. Those black feathers suddenly stood up in the air with a rustling sound. It flew up into the air, looking extremely beautiful. Amidst the raging fire, black feathers fluttered down, gently placing the sleeping Hellion Vivian on the ground. The devil's snare flowers that only bloomed in hell were now blooming on both sides of her. They were like flowers in tea, a breathtaking beauty. In the sea of flowers, the outline of a cold figure gradually appeared. That figure walked over, and behind his fur cloak was a soaring azure dragon and a blazing Qilin beast. He had a smile on his face that could make heaven and earth lose its beauty. His cat-like eyes narrowed slightly, emitting a golden color that symbolized nobility. His lips were very pale, shining like pearls. His slender fingers were wrapped in black gloves. revealing only an inch of his porcelain white wrist, attracting people's attention. His posture was very elegant, and his black robe fluttered with the wind. His name in the human world was Beligaju. In reality, he was the demon who controlled the entire darkness, and loved to play with people's hearts and destroy human consciousness. He tilted his head and picked up little Seven, who was in the array, with one hand. In an instant, the blackness on the little one's fingers began to fade. Even his scarlet eyes gradually sank, and he slowly closed his eyes. It was obvious that Beligaju had cut off his consciousness. Many immature divine beasts would constantly suck when they went berserk. They would not frighten you. Even when they were smiling sweetly, they would bite your throat and suck it greedily. They were just hungry children. In their eyes, humans were like milk bottles filled to the brim with milk. They were meant to be drunk. Their appetite was even bigger than that of an adult divine beast. Because they did not have a sense of good and evil, and did not have the rationality to suppress their instincts. Just like little Seven right now, his soft body was leaning in Bailey Jiaju's arms. With his thumb in his mouth, his little white fangs poked out. He was so handsome and flawless. From time to time, he would bite his thumb, looking like he was crying piteously for food. Beligaju frowned slightly, and with a cool expression, he held him with one hand. Of course, his action was not gentle, because the way he held the child was wrong. However, this did not affect his sense of oppression at all. The Imperial guards looked at him, and their faces showed fear. They retreated in panic, and put away the bows in their hands. Fear surged from their blood. Your Highness, it seems that I have been away for too long, and that made you forget my methods. You even dared to touch little Seven? Beligaju laughed. His fangs bit down on his black gloves, and his thin lips gently spat out a string of laughter. The Imperial guards could not help but curl up together, and their faces were filled with unprecedented respect and fear. Your Highness, please listen to our explanation. All right, I will listen to your explanation. However, it has to be in hell. As he spoke, his eyes, which were filled with deep black marks, narrowed. The row of Imperial guards in front felt their hearts twisting into a ball. Starting from their fingers, they were burned by the blooming red spider lilies, making sizzling sounds. Beligaju seemed to hate this dirty scene, and he waved his long sleeves. Those Imperial guards did not even have time to scream before they turned into a pool of blood. When the evil spirits saw this scene, they fiercely narrowed their eyes. Although they were shocked by the sudden appearance of the man in front of them, they did not believe that a human could do anything to them. They opened their empty mouths and blocked in front of the man. Human, you better move away. Don't ruin our business. Beligaju's mouth was still curved, and his sharp white teeth were exposed. His handsome face was like a god, and he looked down at those evil spirits from above. He loosened his collar with one hand. Are you threatening me? You. The evil spirits had never seen such a bold human. One of them flew out and wanted to retaliate. However, before its teeth could get close to the man's face, the man grabbed it tightly in his hand. Chapter 631. Beligaju had a faint smile on his face as he exerted force. The thing in his hand instantly turned into a pool of black water. The evil spirits looked at this scene in disbelief. They sensed an unprecedented danger and wanted to escape. But Beligaju didn't give them the chance to do so. He walked past those evil spirits and ordered behind him, Qilin, swallow them all. At this time, the evil spirits realized that the divine beast Fire Qilin was hiding behind the man. Their eyes shook violently, and a kind of unknown fear surged in their hearts. They scrambled to dodge, but it was too late. The Fire Qilin opened its mouth and swung its tail, sucking them all into its mouth, and chewing them back and forth with its thick claws. The only thing that the evil spirits regretted before they died was that they had underestimated this man. One by one, they roared softly, but they couldn't change their fate of being destroyed. Next, Beligaju's thin lips curled up slightly, and his gaze landed on the trembling elder. It's your turn. At this time, the elder was already affected by the other party, and couldn't control his appearance. His arms and claws broke out of his body and clawed at the ground, wanting to quickly fly away. Tap, tap, tap. The man's footsteps sounded behind him, elegant and gentle, but bloodthirsty as life itself. The surrounding yin-yang masters were stunned by this scene, because they never expected that one of the four great elders was actually a demon wearing human skin. At this time, the demon was constantly kicking its hind claws, but the stone road under its front claws had already cracked, spreading over at a moderate speed, like a small stream of black blood that was crookedly flowing under the ice. It only felt that its back was cold, as if it had fallen into hell and couldn't break free. There was a bang. In the end, the bound monster was reduced to dust, and its flesh fell to the ground. The ministers were dumbfounded, and they couldn't come back to their senses as they trembled. That night, they saw too many things that they didn't even dare to think about. Amidst the howling cold wind, Bailey Jiaju's delicate yet grave and stern face raised an evil aura of a smile yet not a smile. Under the moonlight, his pure black robe reflected a kind of ghostly luster. His figure flashed, and when he reappeared, he had already directly landed on the roof of the opposite house. There was still a remnant aura of the exorcist tribe's guardian, but the person was gone. Only a dream demon was left behind. You sure are quick to slip away. Baligaju sneered. When Dream Demon saw Baligaju's face, he was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. With a trembling voice he said, "King Yu, you are still alive?" Baligaju glanced at him condescendingly. He raised his hand and effortlessly made Dream Demon spit out a mouthful of black blood. Even so, Dream Demon didn't dare to resist. He trembled as he said, "King, I really don't know anything. If I knew that you were still alive, I definitely wouldn't have listened to the exorcist tribe's orders." Ugh. Before he could finish, Dream Demon's throat was locked by an invisible force. He touched his neck, and his eyes widened as if they were about to explode. Baligaju turned sideways, and his cold voice slid past his ears. "I have never cared about what orders you listen to. What I can't tolerate is that you touched my prey. That person can only be bullied by me. You are not worthy." Bang! Following the elder's example, another demon had self-destructed. Baligaju put down the little one in his armpit. With a move of his slender fingers, an exquisitely made silver earring appeared on the little one's ear. This was a device that the owner of the divine beast specially used to suppress their divine beast from going berserk. Then he retracted his hand, and his ring finger pressed against his thumb, making a crisp sound. Pa! The earring was hidden. The little one made a sound, and the fur on his two little paws faded, revealing smooth skin. Azure Dragon couldn't help but look surprised. It is? Fire Qilin took a step forward and touched his chin with his front paw. It should be the Tunshin. This child? It's the Tunshin? Azure Dragon was still doubtful. Fire Qilin glanced at him. Don't forget, none of us have seen the Tunshin's human form. There must be a reason why Master pampers him so much. You mean to say that Master pampers whoever is younger? Azure Dragon never knew that he lost in terms of age. The bystanders couldn't understand what these two ancient divine beasts were talking about. Hellion Vivian, who was in a light sleep, felt that there was a lot of noise around her ears. She couldn't hear clearly due to her drowsiness. In the darkness, she tried to communicate with Yuan Ming using her consciousness, but he didn't reply. This made Wei Wei feel strange. According to reason, she and the other party had signed a lifetime contract, spirit and demon as one. This guy should be even more cocky. How come he didn't even pay attention to her, and didn't pay attention to her? Hellion Vivian couldn't open her eyes, so she used her consciousness to call Yuan Ming's name again. This time, there was a response, but it was an unfathomable breathing sound, and it was very cold. Could it be that the demon was impatient after getting the human soul? The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she wanted to wake up. She knew the ability of a lifetime contract. After selling the soul to the demon's power would be 10 times stronger. Yuan Ming had said a long time ago that he had lost a lot of his magic power. In this case, his magic power should have been restored. What about Little Seven? How was Little Seven? Hellion Vivian used all her strength to move her fingers on the soft feathers. This huge change caused the Emperor to slowly narrow his eyes. He looked at Baligaju, and an uncomfortable feeling lingered in his chest. Was this still the third prince? Beligaju's martial qi had already surpassed the emperor's expectations. Originally, he planned to use thousands of imperial guards to subdue third prince, even if he wanted to save little Seven. But now, he wasn't sure if his imperial guards would be of any use. Especially behind third prince, there was a huge azure dragon circling around him. Dragons in ancient times were a sign of good fortune. That was why people often said that the true dragon was the son of heaven. Now a dragon had appeared, but it had appeared behind Beligaju. How could the emperor not be jealous and angry? Some of the officials in the Ministry of Appointments had already started whispering to the azure dragon, and all of them were saying that Beligaju was the true descendant of the true dragon. Beligaju didn't say anything. The emperor couldn't stand it anymore, and said, "Third prince, I don't believe that you can't see what little Seven is in your arms. It's a demon. You're actually protecting a demon. Hand it over to the imperial guards now, and I can overlook your foolishness this time." Chapter 632. Demon. Beligaju tilted his head and looked at the emperor with his long and narrow eyes. His eyes quickly reflected the image of an embryo that was about to take shape. It was a sign that a human was being invaded by evil energy. He looked at the emperor and curled his thin lips. His voice carried a hint of indifference. "You know very well who is the real demon. The direction and flow of the moat can only be controlled by the emperor's handwritten order. Those palace maids died in the moat. You're in such a hurry to pin the blame on others because you want to clear yourself of suspicion. However, do you really think that you can clear yourself of suspicion?" As Beligaju approached, the emperor felt his breathing getting heavier. His left eye became a little blurry, and the white of his eye was exposed. It rolled up fiercely, but he didn't notice it at all. Eunuch Gao, who was closest to him, fell to the ground in fright. He pointed at the emperor's left shoulder and kept backing away. Fear was written all over his face. Only then did the emperor look to his side, only to see a baby's head suddenly appear there, sitting on his shoulder. The lower half of the baby's body was buried in his back, as if it had grown out of his body. A pair of scarlet eyes were glaring at him eerily. The emperor froze and his whole body was cold. How could this be? What was buried in his body? Although he would hear a satisfied sigh every time it was time to eat the elixir, he always thought that it was his own sigh. But now the emperor was scared and shouted in panic. He no longer had the image of an emperor. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Men, come quickly. Take this damn thing away from me." However, no one dared to go near him. The ministers of the Ministry of Appointments screamed in horror. The imperial guards rolled and crawled 10 feet away from him. This time, the emperor was truly alone. The most frightening thing was that the baby on his shoulder actually moved towards him, and the dead man's face was pressed against his face. The emperor sat on the ground and screamed in a sharp voice, "Stay away from me! Stay away from me! Keep it away from you!" Beligaju laughed coldly. "How stupid are you? You've sucked the blood of so many young girls, so of course you'll form resentment. Resentment gives birth to evil, and evil comes from the heart. In time, it will replace you and occupy your body. How could it give up on such a good nourishment like you?" Hearing Beligaju's words, the emperor seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He lifted his face and looked at him pleadingly. "Third brother, you must have a way, right? Quickly, quickly save Imperial Father." Li Jiaju didn't move at all. He only stood tall and straight, looking down at him with obvious coldness. When Hellion Vivian woke up, she saw this scene. That familiar figure stood in the midst of the flames of war. The azure dragon circled in the sky above, and the divine beast at his feet. However, no one or thing could withstand the waves in his eyes. That pair of enigmatic eyes flowed with faint golden circuits, reflecting his fair face. It was filled with a kind of enchanting feeling, like some kind of powerful force, a divine miracle that was extremely beautiful to the extreme. At that moment, Hellion Vivian thought she saw an illusion. She reached out and pressed her aching temples. When she looked again, that person was still there. She couldn't help but communicate with Yuan Ming through her consciousness. Her usually lazy voice became full of energy. "Yuan Ming, did you see that? He's back, he's really back." Yuan Ming didn't give her any reply. Not far away, Beligaju moved his fingers with a black glove. He looked down at the emperor who was kneeling on the ground, and planned to leave. In a moment of desperation, the emperor shouted, "I am your father. Are you going to watch your father become a monster that is neither human nor ghost?" Hearing this, Beligaju smiled. His thin lips had a hint of evil that made people uneasy. "Don't worry. You don't have the chance to become neither human nor ghost. Because it's already awake. It should be hungry." What do you mean by that?" The emperor was not stupid. Soon a possibility flashed through his mind. He immediately looked to his left. That baby had indeed woken up. Its pair of empty eyes stared at the emperor. Its voice was cold. "Blood, I want blood." Before the emperor could react, his neck was bitten by the baby. The gurgling sound of blood being sucked rang out, making everyone's hair stand on end, and their hair stand on end. The faces of the officials of the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs were pale. They watched as the emperor reached out his hands, desperately trying to shake off the baby on his shoulder. However, because they were one body, they couldn't do anything. The emperor kept struggling. When he looked at Beligaju, his eyes were filled with jealousy and hatred. From the beginning, he knew that this child was a treacherous one. It had never respected him, the emperor, as its father. As expected, the older it got, the less it listened to his control. Now it didn't even want to save him. Why didn't such a person die? Why was he the one who died in the end? God had clearly told him that as long as he did what he had to do, he would be able to obtain immortality. Could it be that God was lying to him? Crunch. The baby opened its mouth and broke his bones. The emperor could no longer struggle. He could only lie on the ground in a sorry state. Blood seeped out of his body, as if he was in despair. His eyes gradually lost their light. When the officials saw this, they couldn't help but sigh. At the same time, they felt fear. They never thought that the emperor would become like this. They also never thought that he would be the murderer of the palace maids. They all knew that the emperor wanted to pursue immortality. But what they didn't expect was that the other party was already infatuated to this extent. In this world, you reap what you sow. If you don't believe it, look to the heavens. Who can spare you? The emperor's blood was sucked dry by the baby that had poked out of his body. In less than 10 seconds, it was lying on the emperor's neck. Its pair of faint green eyes were extremely terrifying. Of course, Beligaju wouldn't let it have its fill. He glanced at the azure dragon and said in an indifferent voice, "This one's yours." "Yes, master." The azure dragon thought that it was finally its turn. With a roll, it swallowed the baby into its stomach, leaving no trace behind. After that, the entire palace of heavenly purity fell silent. Beligaju began to pace again. His long legs and waistline were perfectly restrained. He still looked noble and indifferent. However, this time, the ends of his hair were suffused with a silvery white color that symbolized evil. It was the symbol of a demon. Hellion Vivian wasn't sure if he had seen her. He seemed to have seen her, but he didn't want to acknowledge her. Chapter 633. Suddenly, Hellion Vivian remembered what he said to her before she left. "Even if I hate you after I go back, you still want me to go back with you?" How could she forget that this person always kept his word? Just like now, he didn't even look at her. Her arched fingers gradually turned cold. Hellion Vivian moved her legs and wanted to get up, but she realized that she had lost too much energy. Even standing was difficult. She couldn't help but complain in her consciousness. "Yuan Xiaoming, don't you think His Highness is too petty? He holds grudges and is hard to appease. If I didn't come back then, what else could I have done? He actually ignored me. Capitalists are really inhumane." Hellion Vivian originally wanted to vent her anger and drag Yuan Ming along with her. But this time, for some reason, Yuan Ming still didn't reply. That's strange. In the past, Yuan Ming didn't like His Highness that much. Why was he so quiet this time? On the other hand, Bailey Jiaju paused in his steps. His noble gaze swept past the green dragon and landed on Hellion Weiwei. Hellion Vivian couldn't tell what he meant. His expression was cold and aloof. He even had a look that said, "Just you wait." It couldn't be that he heard her badmouthing him, right? That shouldn't be possible. He wasn't Yuan Ming. How could he receive her consciousness? He probably hated her so much that he was thinking of ways to torture her. Inhumane, Hellion Vivian said again. She even raised her fist. Other than anger, there was also an indescribable loneliness in her eyes. She felt a little stuffy in her chest. This feeling was really uncomfortable. At this time, people from the Holy Worship Palace arrived. Nangonglai led the army to control the imperial guards that the emperor had arranged outside and surrounded the entire palace of heavenly purity. When he saw Hellion Vivian, his expression was very strange. It was obvious that he was different from before. His memory had been refreshed, so of course it would be different. However, Nangonglai's ability to accept things was still relatively strong. After all, he was a priest who knew everything from astronomy to geography. He didn't care much about someone going back to the past and changing their memories. What made Nangonglai feel difficult to deal with was Beligage's idea of Hellion Vivian. At that time, after this woman left, Aju was filled with hostility, as if he had lost all hope in everything. When he killed someone, his eyes were cold to a certain extent, as if it had nothing to do with him no matter who died in front of him. He shut himself in the palace, and no longer had any contact with anyone. Even the one from the Hellion family, who sent him an invitation, was rejected. From that day onwards, there was no one by Aju's side. Nangonglai could clearly feel the hatred emanating from Aju. It was as cold as a cut diamond, perfect but hurtful. As a former ally, Nangonglai felt that it was necessary for him to intercede for Hellion Vivian. He leaned to one side and blocked Beligage's way. Aju, don't tell me that you're really going to argue with Bossway because of that matter? I don't think that what she did was wrong. Although until now, he still did not know why Hellion Vivian would suddenly return to the past and then disappear all of a sudden. According to that person's way of doing things, it should be something good for everyone. Beligaju did not even bother to pay attention to him. He walked past him and said without turning his head, "Shut up." After saying that, he walked towards Hellion Vivian. When he walked past the crowd, he was like a natural light source. Everyone's eyes were attracted to him at the same time, following his movements. Basically, he did not change much. His beautiful and deep eyes outlined a charming beauty. There was always a faint smile on his lips. However, his eyes were too cold when he looked at Hellion Vivian. It was so cold that even Hellion Vivian felt a little pain in her bones. Was he determined to treat her as a stranger and ignore her? Hellion Vivian's fingers brushed the black feathers on the ground. When she raised her head again, she found that there were two slender and straight legs beside her. She looked up along the legs. The handsome and elegant man had already walked in front of her. His eyes were elegant and handsome, but there was a trace of sharp indifference. The circle of fur on the shoulder of the cloak made him look even more noble. Beligaju bent down. His eyes were at the same level as hers. His expression was very cold. He used a strength that seemed to want to firmly lock everything that he saw, and directly grabbed her leg when she was trying to get up. Nangonglai watched from the side with fear. He thought to himself, is Aju going to punish her here? Hellion Vivian frowned and met the man's gaze. Beligaju's slender fingers held Hellion Vivian's ankle just like that. There was a familiar smile that made people's heart beat faster at the corner of his mouth, but the coldness in his eyes made Hellion Vivian subconsciously want to escape. At this time, Bailey Jiaju pressed his voice into her ear and said in a deep and magnetic voice, "Inhumane? Narrow-minded? Vengeful and hard to coax?" Hearing these adjectives, Hellion Vivian instantly widened her eyes. It can't be, he knew everything she was thinking? Yuan Xiaoming he. Hellion Vivian still wanted to use the stream of consciousness. Beligaju directly pinched her chin. His breath blew on her lips. It was still very cold. Don't shout. Don't you feel the connection between you and me? Connection? Hellion Vivian looked down and saw that there was a pattern brand on her and Beligaju's wrists respectively. That was the symbol of a lifetime contract. When the owner sold the soul to the demon, the contract mark would be made. The creation of this symbol was to let the owner summon the demon at the first time when they encountered difficulties. Secondly, It was convenient for the demon to control the owner. Even if the owner escaped to the ends of the earth, as long as the symbol brand was still there, the demon could find the owner. When he wanted to, he could swallow the owner's soul. But why did such a symbol appear on Beligaju's hand? She clearly made a contract with Yuan Ming. Could it be you and Yuan Ming? You too. There was no warmth in Bailey Jiaju's voice. Slowly he said, Yuan Ming is also a fragment of me. When the divine exorcism seal descended upon the world, and I was reborn as a human, the remaining demonic nature became Yuan Ming. Later on, it was sealed in the ancient book and lost all its previous memories and spells. The eternal contract must be signed with the demon's primordial spirit, and I am Yuan Ming's primordial spirit. Hellion Vivian. So when she chanted the summoning spell just now, she summoned the primordial spirit. The primordial spirit would definitely combine with the fragment to become her new contracted demon. That is to say, the recipient of her complaints just now was actually a certain highness. Chapter 634. Hellion Vivian thought about what she said, and wanted to find a hole to bury herself in. Have you thought about how to face me? Beligaju put one arm through her ear, and pressed on the black feather behind her, closing the distance between the two of them. With every word he said, his breath would hit her lips. This allowed Hellion Vivian to clearly smell the addictive smell coming from his body. Even the curve of his jaw was extremely sexy. No matter how she thought about it, she only thought about kissing him. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled evilly. Why don't you let me kiss you? Then we can continue talking. Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes with an icy chill. His fingers exerted force and pulled her entire body closer to him. His fingers pressed on her thin lips and forcefully crushed them back and forth. Do you think that I will still fall for this trick of yours? Since you're already back, can't you just pretend that nothing happened? Hellion Vivian had a smile on her face, but her heart sank a little. Bailey Jiaju laughed, his voice was cold. You want to pretend that nothing happened? Do you think it's possible? It's possible under normal circumstances. Hellion Vivian supported herself with her fingers. Beligaju looked at her with an indifferent expression. It's impossible for this king. Hellion Vivian felt that it was difficult to breathe. What should she do? She wanted to drag Beligaju over and ask him properly. But what did he want her to do? Do you have to make such a clear distinction between yourself? No matter if it's a soul fragment or your primordial spirit, to me, it's still you. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian was originally a person who didn't get angry easily, because she was a person who would directly stay away from someone if she didn't like them. If she liked them, she would protect them like they were her children. It was the first time that she used all her strength to speak like this. You're so smart, it's impossible that you don't understand. You're so arrogant because I like you. Hellion Vivian grabbed the man's collar and growled. If you're angry, then tie me up if you can. Why are you so cold? After shouting, Hellion Vivian's head was buzzing, as if she finally calmed down. She took a deep breath and said in a light voice, You can think whatever you want. Since you're already back, you can hate me as much as you want. It's fine if you don't want to talk to me, but don't find trouble with me now. I'm tired. She was really tired. For so many days, she had been so tense in her mind until now. In the end, this was the result. She couldn't cope. She pushed him away, stood up, and wanted to leave. In the end, before she could even lift her leg, someone grabbed her wrist from behind. Her back was forcefully pressed into the other party's chest. A familiar voice rang in her ears, carrying a trace of mockery. Why didn't this highness notice before that you like being tied up so much? Let go. Hellion Vivian tried to calm her breathing. Beligaju sneered in her ear. Let go? We've signed an eternal contract. From now on, you only belong to me. From the inside out, you're all mine. Do you think you can leave just like that? Hellion Vivian lowered her head and didn't say anything. Damn it, she had forgotten about this. This person only knew how to bully her. Hellion Weiwei was so angry that she could not wait to bite him, and she really did so. She grabbed his hand and opened her mouth. In the end, it didn't fall. It was a sin to leave a mark on such a beautiful hand. It was rare that she was still thinking about beauty and ugliness at this time. Hellion Vivian's eyes dimmed. Some people compared love to a game. Whoever used more sincerity would be the winner. There was no right or wrong. No one let down the other. It was about who liked who more. Who couldn't bear to part with who more. She couldn't bear to part with him now. Could this be considered revenge? He begged her so much at that time. He didn't hesitate to throw away his pride, so that she could stay. She still left. Now that revenge had come, she said that she was tough because she never thought that it would be so painful when she lost. Half an incense stick's worth of time. Beligage's voice suddenly sounded again. This time, he let go of her wrist. He didn't have that much strength. He only gently hugged her waist and pressed his lips against her left ear. Hellion Vivian didn't understand what he meant. Half an incense stick's worth of time? Was he telling her that she was going to die? I was cold to you for only half an incense stick's worth of time, and you couldn't stand it. Beligage's voice was a bit hoarse. Did you calculate how long it would take for me to recover after you appeared and left? Hellion Vivian was stunned. The image of that noble little boy appeared in her mind. He was cold and didn't like to talk. He also didn't get close to others. He only obediently waited for her to return. In an instant her eyes turned red. Bailey Jiaju turned Hellion Weiwei around and used his slender fingers to touch her eyebrows. Then, he lifted her loose strands of hair and kissed her forehead, eyes, and the bridge of her nose. Finally, he pulled her into his arms and wrapped Hellion Weiwei in his fur coat, pressing the bridge of his nose against hers. At this time, Beligaju was very gentle. He was like a precious red wine flowing in the night. He was incomparably smooth and sweet. As long as he was willing, he could give her the most enviable love in the world. He said to her in a low voice, "After you left, I thought that if I see you again in the future, I will definitely break your claws and legs. That way, you can stay by my side forever." When Hellion Vivian heard his words, she felt her hands begin to hurt. "But when I really saw you, I was thinking about how to fiercely take you. I wanted to make your legs go soft and cry for mercy. I wanted to make you unable to leave even if you wanted to." When Beligaju said this, his thin lips fell on her lips. Then he fiercely bit down. It didn't hurt. Instead, it was a bit numb. Hellion Vivian only felt her heart skip a beat. Her face burned a bit unnaturally. This person, what was this person thinking in his head? In order to make myself look less impatient, I didn't want to look at you. You really know how to make your presence known. Beligage's voice was sexy and hoarse. It was so graceful that it was like a good musical instrument. Hellion Vivian knew what he was talking about. It was nothing more than her complaints. How long would it take for this joke to pass? Moreover, the mockery in his voice was so obvious. Hellion Vivian really didn't understand. What did he mean? Why didn't he just say that she couldn't forget him and was daydreaming? Or perhaps he wanted to say that she was very attractive to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kissed her so gently. But what did he mean by making his presence known? Chapter 635. Beligaju looked at the confused person in front of him, as if he had accepted his fate. Forget it. Anyway, your existence is a distraction to me. Wherever you are, I can't concentrate on anything. Was she as annoying as he said? Hellion Vivian showed an angry expression. She was pulled into the man's arms. His fingers stroked her long hair gently, as if he was comforting an animal. He said in a mocking tone, "You're an idiot. Are you still not convinced?" Hellion Vivian stopped breathing. Her nose was filled with that familiar smell. It was so reassuring. Finally, they were all back. In addition to his kindness, there was also his unprincipled love for her. Although it was a bit poisonous, she was already used to a certain highness who did not mean what he said. Hellion Vivian chuckled and reached out to hug him. His waist was thin and strong, so it was very comfortable to hug. As long as Bailey Jiaju lowered his eyes, he could see the smile at the corner of her mouth. It was sly and innocent. She even used a pair of eyes to look at him. Her fingers moved around his waist. Once again he questioned his own taste. How could he fancy such a little hooligan? Her claws were not quiet for a moment. "Is it nice to touch?" Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows, and the air of abstinence hit her face. Not bad. It's quite smooth. Hellion Vivian thought that in the future, these were all mine. She could touch them however she wanted. Beligaju smiled coldly and evilly. Seeing that you like it so much, I'll find a time later to let you touch it. But not here. It should be on the bed. Hellion Vivian was very happy. Is this a benefit? Yes, it's a benefit. Beligaju leaned over, and his thin lips slid past her ear. He was very black-bellied. Because of this touch, Wei Wei's whole body trembled. Beligaju was very satisfied with the effect he had on her. He let go of her and looked up. His gaze landed on the Imperial guards who were holding bows and arrows in the distance. His voice carried the coldness of a superior. You are still holding bows and arrows. Do you want to kill me as well? The Imperial guards looked at each other, not daring to move. But after all, they were directly under the Emperor's command. His Majesty had ordered them to surround this place. Beligaju stared straight at them, as he hugged Hellion Vivian with one hand. His rosy fur cape fluttered in the wind. Behind him was a surging army. Every one of them was dressed in black, and held spears in their hands. They were mighty and unstoppable. Someone recognized them. They were the Shadow Guards personally trained by the Third Prince. There was once a rumor about them. Once the 8,000 Shadow Guards were deployed, there would be no one within 100 miles of them. He had heard too much but seen too little. At this moment, after seeing this scene, the Imperial guards who had been nurtured in the palace all year round were terrified from the bottom of their hearts. Those Shadow Guards stood behind Beligaju with masks on their faces. They were like a demon army that rose from the ground of hell. Every one of them stood upright, as if they were waiting for Beligaju's orders. The light reflected from the numerous silver knives made the old officials who only knew how to rely on the elder compound to panic. They originally wanted to denounce the identity of the seventh prince. Now, not to mention speaking, they didn't even dare to let out a fart. The Imperial guards knew that this was a battle that they had no chance of winning. Pa! Someone put down his bow and arrow and knelt on the ground. Following that, dozens, hundreds, thousands of Imperial guards knelt on one knee and bowed to Beligaju. All the ministers in the Imperial court had mixed feelings when they saw this scene. Among them were the fifth prince's men, the elder compound's men, and the emperor's men. This game of chess with the world as the chessboard had been going on for so long. They had never thought that Beligaju would be the one to obtain the throne in the end. Although he was very capable, he had never understood the ways of officialdom. No matter how talented he was, he would still fall in the end. But now, looking back, the first prince had drowned because the Li family had bullied the third prince back then, and had provoked the emperor's punishment by spouting arrogant words. The Morong family had been doted on by the emperor for 100 years. The emperor doted on Empress Morong, and the fifth prince even more. In the end, because they framed the third prince, they were imprisoned for life, and their entire family was beheaded. Everything that happened seemed to have nothing to do with the third prince, but if one were to trace the reason, everything could not be separated from the third prince. Thinking of this, the officials couldn't help but shudder. Now, it was the emperor's turn to be possessed by a demon. The third prince was just enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, and putting righteousness before family. The emperor's throne was rightful and justifiable. It was inspiring. However, how could the old officials, who had been dealing with officials all year round, not see through the trick? It was because they realized it too late that they couldn't help but feel a chill run down their backs. They thought that the third prince would be dethroned sooner or later. How much thought did he have in order to be able to control the entire court in his own hands? The first prince was gone, the fifth prince was gone, and even the emperor was gone. At this point, there was no longer any doubt as to who would inherit the throne in the future. There was also Hellion Wei Wei. At that time, when this hedonistic good-for-nothing married the third prince, they even secretly sneered at her because of this. After all, the third prince, who originally didn't occupy an advantage in the imperial court, had a burden like this, which would only accelerate his defeat. In the end, not only did this woman become the world's biggest martial arts merchant, she even regained control of the Hellion family. What was even more frightening was that she could actually make the hidden army recognize her as their master. When these two people were separated, it was already frightening enough. Thinking about how His Highness swept away thousands of troops when he appeared, and how many Imperial guards besieged Hellion Vivian, they actually didn't completely force her into a dead end. Now that they were merged, it was really hard to say what would happen in the future. Some of the officials' eyes faintly revealed uneasiness. Nangong Lai watched from the side. He understood the whole sequence of events, so of course he knew what the officials were thinking. Those people must have regretted it so much that their intestines turned green. However, these people definitely didn't know that Arju already had the ability to fight for the throne. If he really wanted to get the throne, he could have led the army to abdicate 7 years ago. However, he didn't do that. Instead, he put down the chess piece in his hand and looked at him calmly. He said in a clear and noble tone, "Something like the throne must be personally delivered to me before I accept it." In other words, he didn't even bother to force the emperor to abdicate. To him, it was also a kind of beauty to get something perfectly. Later, after Hellion Vivian heard the speculations of the officials, she had the opportunity to ask Beligaju himself. At that time, did you plan to kill the first prince from the beginning? Beligaju looked at her and said slowly, "I did want to kill him, but the reason why I did it in the end was not because of the throne." Then why? Chapter 636. Because he had a thought that he shouldn't have. Beligaju pushed Hellion Vivian away with his finger. His eyes darkened. How could he keep someone who dared to look at his prey with that kind of gaze? Then what about the Morong family? Hellion Vivian felt that this person was getting more and more disgusted with her. He even pushed her away when she asked him a question. Beligaju looked at her coldly. "What do you think? Why would I keep someone you used to like there? I'm not that kind. Killing one is still killing two is still killing. It's better to kill all of them. It'll save us trouble in the future." Hellion Vivian was stunned. Then she smiled. "So you're jealous? Does this count as being angry for a beauty?" As she spoke, she took out a mirror from the sleeping Xiaoqi and looked at it. Then she nodded. "It's indeed very beautiful. I also think that this face is too ostentatious." Beligaju supported his face with one hand and used the other to poke her cheek. "Don't you think it'll save us trouble if we destroy it?" Hellion Vivian's hand froze. She didn't make a fuss anymore. She held the bowl and began to eat. Halfway through the meal, she couldn't help but ask, "Then what about the emperor? You raised so many shadow guards just to deal with him one day, right? If he didn't set his eyes on you and Tunshin, I wouldn't let the shadow guards surround the palace." Beligaju's eating posture was still noble and elegant. She couldn't see any trace of a demon on him. However, Hellion Vivian still felt strange. "You can tolerate it so well? It's not like you at all." Bailey Jiaju glanced at her again, and unhurriedly put down the bamboo chopsticks. He put one hand on the back of her chair, and leaned back. His posture was very domineering. "What's the point of arguing with someone who you know will die? Hellion Vivian." So it was like this. She was actually a little speechless. Finished. Beligaju raised his chin and pointed at her empty bowl. He gestured for the palace servants to carry little Seven away. Only then did Hellion Vivian realize that she had actually finished the second bowl of rice, without any change in expression. When did she become so good at eating? What was even sadder was that she didn't feel full. "One more bowl," Hellion Vivian said to herself. She would definitely stop after finishing this bowl. She did stop, but after dinner, she wanted to eat pastries and oranges. When she was picking out pastries, she couldn't free her hands, so she asked a certain highness to peel oranges for her. Beligaju threw an orange to her. It was obvious that he wanted her to eat it herself. Forget it. She didn't expect a certain highness to be gentle, although the other half of a domineering CEO was more gentle, who asked her to be cold and arrogant. As Hellion Weiwei pondered, she turned sideways and peeled the orange peel. She was a very lazy person. If she could lie down, of course, she would not stand up. She just nestled on the furry and carved imperial consort's chair. She was wearing an ancient nightgown with large sleeves. When she stretched out her hand, her jade-like fair arms would be exposed. Coupled with her natural temperament, she gave off the feeling of a lazy cat, which was very charming. Helene Vivian didn't realize how bewitching her posture was at all. She was still muttering, "The plum blossom cake isn't as good as the osmanthus cake." Beligaju had already taken off the fur cloak on his body with one hand, and casually threw it to the palace servants who were holding fruits at the side. "You all can leave. I'll take care of this." "Yes." The palace servants lowered their eyes and stepped back. They were very obedient. Helene Vivian didn't mind. After all, compared to someone watching her every move, she preferred to stay like this. After eating the last piece of orange in her hand, she couldn't help but yawn. Before she could make a sound, she saw Beligaju walking over with a mysterious iron chain in his hand. Helene Vivian's yawning hand suddenly stopped. Before she could react, he pressed her arm down and pressed her into the soft fur. His thin lips curled into a faint smile. "Originally, I didn't plan to tie you up, but after hearing what you said in the Palace of Heavenly Purity today, you seem to like being tied up. In that case, I can only comply with your request." "Who likes being tied up? I was just saying it casually. Can't you just pretend you didn't hear it?" Helene Vivian said as she tried to turn around and escape. Beligaju pressed down on her waist and pulled her entire body back, making her sit on his lap. His tone was a little careless. "No, I can't. Who asked me to be petty and inhumane? I hold grudges and I'm hard to appease." "Helene Vivian. Isn't this over? Why is he bringing it up now? Be good, don't move." Beligaju whispered into her ear in a low voice. His thin lips were practically pressed against the back of her ear. "I'll tie you up until you feel very comfortable." Helene Vivian's body trembled. When she felt a numbing sensation in her ear, Beligaju had already made his move. He leisurely tied her hands with the iron chain. After he was done, he didn't give her any time to think. Almost in the next second, her nightgown was picked up by him. His coarse fingertips wandered wantonly on her bare skin. Helene Vivian couldn't help but tremble, but she couldn't resist the man's invasion. Because of his actions, she felt as if she was suffocating. Her ears were burning, and her mind was filled with snowflakes. She lost all ability to think. The tall figure behind her was getting hotter and hotter, as if it was going to incinerate her. Beligaju smiled. His lips pressed against her reddened left ear, and he licked it with the tip of his hot tongue. Then he slowly moved down to her fair neck. He nibbled and kissed her deeply, leaving a mark. His sandalwood scent seeped into her nose. As long as he wanted to, he could make a woman feel the highest pleasure. Helene Vivian didn't move. If she moved, the iron chain would ring. That kind of sound would sound even more ambiguous. The bridge of his nose was pressed against hers. The tip of his eyebrows and the corners of his eyes were filled with a devilish smile. Not to mention, the heat from Bailey Jiaju's palm could simply burn her. His slender and slightly cold fingers stroked up, and the dense numbness finally landed on the softness in front of her chest. He gently held it. Helene Vivian's body trembled. She felt as if she had been electrocuted. She couldn't help but let out a sound, and reached out to push him away. "Don't!" He pressed her hand down and kissed her neck, which was the most vulnerable part of her body. He sucked deeply, and his other hand hugged her tightly from behind. It was as if he was firmly holding her in his arms. Helene Vivian could even feel his hard erection pressing against her urgently. Chapter 637. When Helene Vivian woke up, it was already noon the next day. Of course, Beligaju was not by her side. There were a lot of things waiting for him to deal with in the palace. She knew that he would not be allowed to stay here. As soon as she got up, she saw Xiaoqi sitting by the bed with a meat bun in his mouth. His little face was full of guilt. "Third sister-in-law." Helene Vivian smiled and rubbed his head. "What's the matter?" "I asked third brother today why you kept sleeping. He said that it was because I was too naughty yesterday. That's why you got hurt." Xiaoqi sat there with his two short legs crossed. His head was still lowered. "I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't want to turn into a beast. When I got my memory back, I remembered third brother. I wanted to kill all the Imperial guards with torches. I didn't expect to get you involved. Only then did Hellion Wei realize that he had grown a tail. As he spoke, it swung back and forth, looking very adorable. However, His Highness was really good at shirking his responsibility. Was it good to be so shameless? It has nothing to do with Shao-Chi. It's someone else's business. Hellion Vivian pinched Shao-Chi's face. You said you got your memory back. Did you remember that you are the sky-swallowing beast? The little one chewed on the meat bun and said, Yes, I remember everything. It's just that my magic power hasn't fully recovered. Third brother put a silver ring on my ear. I can only turn into a mythical beast when I fight. Otherwise, I can carry third sister-in-law outside the palace to drink bean curd. Now that third brother doesn't allow me to fight, I'm bored. Hellion Vivian. So that's why he's worried. Is that brain of yours filled with nothing but eating and fighting? The little one shook his head. No, I care about my image very much. Third sister-in-law, look at me. See if I'm more handsome after waking up. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. You're the most handsome in the world. Go to the Imperial kitchen and get me some meat. I'm starving. There's no need to go to the Imperial kitchen. The little one stood up, and his long tail hit the ground. When third brother left, he asked people to prepare a lot of food. He said that you can only eat when you wake up. So good? Hellion Vivian smiled and hugged her pajamas with both hands. She stood up lazily and stepped on the black blanket barefooted. She stretched out her hand and yawned as she looked at the round sandalwood table. There was a clay pot heating up on the stove. There were pork ribs, potatoes, and vermicelli in it, making it spicy. Sweet potatoes were added as well, making it fragrant. Not to mention, there were also lotus roots, vinegar white jade, 8 treasure duck, spicy beef, Buddha jumps over the wall, and spicy crab. Hellion Vivian was very hungry. Now that she saw these things that she liked, she picked up the bamboo chopsticks and began to eat the pork ribs. She didn't seem to be in a hurry. After all, she had cultivated a good habit since she was young. Even when eating, she was lazy. However, she ate too much. Lil Seven was chewing on a crab leg at the side. He looked at Hellion Vivian and touched the back of his head with his left hand. He was very puzzled. How did third sister-in-law become so good at eating? She ate more than him. He had already eaten 5 bowls of rice, but he was still eating the second bowl. Could it be that his ability had declined? Sigh, this was good too. As a handsome man, he shouldn't eat too much. In the end, the handsome man still ate more than 10 bowls of rice, and third sister-in-law actually ate 1 more bowl than him. This wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that third sister-in-law ate several oranges after she finished eating. The little one stood at the side, wagging his tail and sniffing his nose. He felt that something was wrong. The weather outside the palace became colder. The capital was like this. Once winter came, it would be so cold that people didn't want to go out. Especially when the weather was cloudy and foggy. It would be a vast expanse of white when talking. The emperor had passed away, so the imperial court had to do something. The ministers were all anxious. They stood in the middle of the south study room and didn't dare to raise their heads. Baligaju, who was sitting in the seat of honor, supported his face with one hand and held the booklet in his other hand. Every movement was perfect, as if it was calculated. He didn't say anything, nor did he show a trace of displeasure. His noble and handsome side profile didn't show any joy or anger. He even looked more graceful than when the emperor was on the throne. However, the ministers who came to the court still felt an unprecedented pressure. Cold sweat kept breaking out on their foreheads. Everyone was worried about their future. After a long while, Bailey Jiaju seemed to have finished looking through the things in his hands. His pair of eyes faintly swept over them. I don't need to say anything. You should also be clear on what you did wrong. Drag them away. Your Highness, please spare us. The 3 ministers who had supported the emperor to besiege the 7th prince were dragged away by the masked shadow guards. The remaining people were those who had once stood on the 5th prince's side. They had originally thought that this was the end for them. Unexpectedly, that person just took a sip of tea and said in a clear voice, Lord Liu, what's the matter with the booklet you presented? Lu Yu was still thinking that he might be beheaded in the next moment. He didn't expect such a stroke of genius. However, for the sake of the country, he still straightened his back and reported, "There's news from the Xianyuan kingdom. Someone in the elder residence has noticed the changes in the court. They said that the seal in the capital may be broken. Once the divine exorcism seal is destroyed, the whole world will not be peaceful. They want to send people to guard it." Send people to guard it? Wu Jing couldn't help but say, "Go and ask them. If there's a fight over there, can we send people over to stop it? Fuck. They obviously have other intentions." Lu Yu coughed, reminding him that things were different now. He couldn't speak without thinking. After all, the third prince was not the fifth prince. They weren't close to him at all. Moreover, in such a situation, they probably wouldn't survive today. However, what he didn't expect was that the person sitting in the seat of honor actually said casually, "My thoughts are the same as yours, General Wu. However, our methods are different. I don't like to travel mountains and rivers to slap people's faces. It's easier to kill them if they come over." Wu Jing was a general and had been on the battlefield all year round. He had never seen anyone as ruthless as the one in front of him. However, with such a person as the leader, they could be hot-blooded when fighting a war. He increasingly felt that the third prince should be the one to sit on the throne. Lu Yu was a civil official and had always been thoughtful. He originally thought that since the fifth prince had been defeated, the third prince wouldn't let them stay because of his ruthlessness. However, now it seemed that he was blind. This was how an emperor should be. In the past, Lu Yu helped the fifth prince because of his father. Now Beligaju was like a fine steed meeting a bull. He could only accept it wholeheartedly. Chapter 638. The people from the Xianyuan kingdom are doing this because they see that our elder compound is empty. They don't have a backbone who knows how to exorcise demons. Outside the hall, Nangonglai walked in with an evil smile. He held a feather fan in his hand and waved it back and forth. "They're clearly looking down on your abilities, Your Highness." Beligaju crossed his legs and glanced at him. That indifferent gaze was more or less a little bit cold. Nangonglai straightened his body in an instant, cleared his throat, and said in all seriousness, "This subject went to patrol today. There are indeed not many people who know the art of exorcism. The emissary of the Xianyuan kingdom has already arrived within our borders and will enter the capital tomorrow. Although they say they are here to pay their respects, in reality, they are planning to send someone to test our background first." Hearing Nangonglai's words, Wu Jing couldn't help but feel angry again. The emperor's body hasn't entered its grave yet, and the morning bell was only rung yesterday. It's impossible that the emissaries from the other countries didn't know. Are those people from the Xianyuan kingdom here to bully us? Lu Yu thought carefully for a while and said, "That's probably what they're planning." Lu Yu couldn't help but feel lucky that the third prince was in charge. Less than a day had passed since the emperor's last breath. The third prince had already turned the entire situation around. The Ministry of War and the Ministry of Civil Affairs were all in his hands. His speed was admirable. If it were any other prince in charge, they wouldn't be able to handle the current situation. After all, the foreign enemies were attacking. At this time, the powerful courtiers could very well start a military coup. Only the third prince could control the world like this. Lu Yu felt more at ease when he thought of this. However, he considered the practical problem and had to say, the Xianyuan kingdom is the best at exorcism. With Elder Su Wu in charge, we really don't have anyone who can handle it. Our War Dragon dynasty is full of talents. Apart from those old antiques in the Elder compound, is there no one else who can exorcise demons? Wu Jing didn't believe it. Let's not talk about others first. Take our Highness as an example. His martial qi is the best in the world, and he has the fire qilin and the azure dragon by his side. Who can't he deal with? Lu Yu shook his head and said, "Wu Jing, you still don't admit that you are a bore. The art of exorcism has nothing to do with the strength of one's martial qi. The two mythical beasts that protect His Highness can indeed make all the demonic beasts in the world tremble. But once he encounters ghosts and evil spirits, There is no way to distinguish where the yin qi is. Since there is no way to distinguish, he doesn't know how to deal with it. Then what do you think we should do? Wu Jing clenched his teeth. Lu Yu didn't know what to do either. We can only let the yin-yang masters of the Elder Council step in for the time being. I hope someone can do it. Hearing their conversation, the Fire Qilin laughed beside Beligage's ears and said, Master, don't they know that as long as you show your true face, all ghosts and evil spirits will have to kneel down and beg for mercy in front of you? They weren't there when we surrounded the palace yesterday. This sentence was said by the Azure Dragon. Beligage's face was still languid and noble. He sat there like a king, with one hand supporting the side of his face, and the other hand casually resting on his slender legs. On the surface, he looked so gentle and harmless. However, if one looked closely, they would realize that there was a cold light in his long and narrow eyes. The envoys from the Xianyuan kingdom had already set their itinerary. They arrived near Shandong that night. The flags were erected, and there was an 8 trigrams formation on each side. Compared to the envoys from other kingdoms, the envoys from the Xianyuan kingdom were obviously different. Each of them wore a white robe and carried 2 swords on their backs. One had an ice blade, and the other was made of peach wood. They walked with the posture of immortals. They were all young, but they were used to traveling at night. Wherever they were, it was as if the filthy things in the dark had to avoid them. His Highness the Crown Prince, we have arrived at Shandong. We will enter the capital tomorrow. A young man in a white robe flew over from afar and landed beside the group. He leaned against the carriage and said respectfully, The enemy must have received the news and made preparations in advance. A voice came from inside, as if it was not a surprise. We have so many people. If the War Dragon dynasty still doesn't notice, then it will be over for them. Yes. The young man lowered his head. Elder Suwu did not seem to care at all. And Lu, you don't have to worry too much. The War Dragon dynasty doesn't have many exorcists. Now even the elders that I know have been removed by their third prince. On top of that, their emperor has just passed away. The situation in the court is definitely unstable. The War Dragon dynasty is now riddled with holes. They won't have the strength to deal with us. Besides, even if they want to deal with us, they need the strength to do so. Elder Suwu's words are too full of themselves. That His Highness is famous for his martial prowess. He is not as weak as you say. The voice was soft. It was obvious that it was a woman speaking. Elder Suwu smiled and stroked his white beard as he said, Yes. The princess is right. That His Highness that you have taken a fancy to is definitely not a fish in a pond. Elder. The young girl's face was pink. Although she was wearing a veil, one could still see it. It was clear that she was not angry at Elder Suwu's words. Instead, there was an indescribable shyness in her. The man sitting in the middle of the carriage curled his lips as he watched this scene. His eyes were filled with aggression. It was nighttime in the brightly lit sleeping quarters. Hellion Vivian and Little Seven sat facing each other. One was eating while the other was eating. It was as if they were having a competition. One big head and one small head were facing each other. It was an indescribable harmony. The figure of the mercenary following beside Hellion Weiwei flashed and landed in front of Hellion Weiwei, respectfully and reverently whispering something in a low voice. Hellion Vivian raised an eyebrow and yawned as she asked, Xianyuan Kingdom? Yes. The mercenary knelt on one knee and lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian smiled and lazily stretched her back. Her figure was very beautiful. Does their princess not know that the man she has taken a fancy to is already someone else's mistress? I thought that everyone in the world would know that Beligaju is mine. Is it not obvious enough? Mercenary, he said so much, including the purpose of this trip to the Xianyuan kingdom. He basically wants to slap the War Dragon Empire's face. And if possible, war might even break out. With so many important matters, how could young Miss only hear that little bit? He actually had a feeling of speechlessness. Shadow, who had followed Beligaju in, was even more shocked. He instinctively looked at his master's expression. After all, the word mistress was too ambiguous. Chapter 639. Bailey Jiaju leisurely stopped where he was and looked at the person lying on the small couch with a smile that was not a smile. Hellion Vivian did not realize that he had come in. She lowered her head and struggled with the orange in her hand. Her voice carried a hint of laziness. 100,000 taels of silver for meeting her, 1,000,000 taels of silver for admiring her, and 10 million taels of silver for sitting down and drinking tea with her. The mercenary did not understand what Hellion Vivian meant. "Miss, what is this?" "The royal family's appearance fee." Hellion Vivian realized that she had finished the orange in her hand and wanted to take another one. Fortunately, someone was smart enough to pass it to her. Hellion Vivian had just taken it when she heard a gasp. She happily peeled the orange and ate another piece before saying, "What's wrong? You think it's too expensive? It's fine. It's a waste not to take advantage of a girl like Princess Xianyuan. Just do as I say. The other party will definitely prepare the money." The little one who was eating with her heard her words, and her tiger-like eyes widened. She held half an orange in her mouth and tugged at Hellion Vivian with her little hand. "Little Seven, why do you keep tugging at me?" Hellion Vivian's voice was obviously weaker when she turned around. Bailey Jiaju tossed up the tangerine in his hand. The corners of his mouth curled up coldly. "Why aren't you saying anything? Continue. This highness wants to hear what this highness' other prices are." Hellion Vivian choked on the orange in her mouth and felt guilty. Shadow and the mercenaries were smart enough to retreat. Baligija glanced at the little one. The little one immediately stood up straight and gave Hellion Vivian a look that said, "Good luck." Then she left with a big pile of food. Hellion Vivian felt that she must be having a bad year. She was caught saying bad things. What bad luck? However, after Baligiju said that, he didn't say anything else. Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. She thought of an excuse and said, "I'll go and see if the dinner is ready." Baligiju reached out and pulled open his fur coat. When she stood up, he pulled her back and pressed her into his embrace. His black fingers rubbed her wrist as he smiled devilishly. "If Madam didn't mention it, this husband would have forgotten. Since you're the one who bought me, then if I don't do something, wouldn't I be letting down Madam's money in?" The last word made Hellion Vivian's face burn. When His Highness said do something, he definitely didn't mean do something in the ordinary sense. "I'm very satisfied with you. You don't have to do anything on the chaise lounge anymore." "Really?" Hellion Vivian looked at him seriously. Baligiju looked at her and smiled wickedly. "So you don't like this place? We can go to the South Study. I remember you were very nervous there." Hellion Vivian felt numb all over. She felt his fingers move. She curled up in his arms like a shrimp and protested in a low voice. "What does this have to do with the place? This is a matter of the number of times." To her surprise, the man actually took his hand back and nodded with a smile. He agreed with her words. "This is indeed a matter of the number of times. Thank goodness, you're finally democratic for once." Hellion Weiwei beamed with joy as she lowered her head and continued to peel oranges. She began to plan to free up her time at night in the future and go outside the palace or something. This highness will increase the number of times as appropriate in the future. Baligiju's voice had a hint of evil. "You should be satisfied with this, right?" Hellion Vivian quickly turned her head. "Increase the number of times. You look very touched." Baligiju leaned over and kissed the back of her hand like a gentleman. The smile on his face grew wider and wider. Under the reflection of the fireworks in the city, it was incomparably charming. After all, this highness is being kept by someone. This highness still understands the rules. Hellion Vivian. She doesn't look like she's touched at all. Also, don't say that I'm really a prostitute. That night, Hellion Vivian realized how much a certain someone understood the rules. Her entire body was weak, and she didn't even have the strength to raise her arms. He still didn't let her go. He only said fiercely in her ear, "Let other women admire this highness?" Hellion Vivian opened her eyes wide during the thrusting. He was like a nail that nailed her to the ground. He was getting heavier and deeper, but he didn't move. Even his breath was hot. "If you like money, this highness can give it to you. But if this highness hears what you said just now again, this highness won't let you go. Do you understand?" Helene Vivian's long legs were bent. Her body was already at its limit, but he stopped there and only rubbed that maddening spot. He wasn't willing to give her a quick end. Her beautiful phoenix eyes had already been forced to tear up just now. Now there was even a hint of pleading. Jew. It was rare to see her like this. Beligaju's eyes darkened. His fingers tightened on her waist. Be good, beg me. Beg me and I'll give it to you. Beg ah. Helene Vivian cried out involuntarily after the violent thrusting. The curtain moved with the waves and didn't disperse for a long time. Helene Vivian was tormented so much that it was inevitable that she would feel sleepy. On the other hand, Bailey Jiaju woke up early. He stood tall and straight beside the bed, looking like he was already fully dressed. Usually, under such circumstances, Helene Weiwei would continue to sleep while he went about his business. But today was different. Helene Vivian woke up early and was lying lazily in the quilt. There was a smile on her face. What should I do when I'm hungry? Beligaju smiled and bent down. He picked up Helene Vivian along with the quilt and placed her in his arms. Helene Vivian looked at the palace servants who came in like flowing clouds. She didn't avoid them and just let him carry her lazily. 2 strands of hair stood on her head, and she yawned from time to time. Bailey Jiaju found it funny. He leaned over and kissed her. Then, he helped her wash her claws and let her rinse her mouth with peppermint water. Then, he carried her and moved her directly to the wooden table. Both of them were very good-looking. One was lazy, and the other was abstinent and noble. When paired together, people couldn't help but take a second look. However, they had never seen a woman like Helene Vivian in the palace. Any concubine would be shy and have scruples when they were favored. Unlike the third princess consort, who had a wicked smile on her face. This made them lower their heads involuntarily. Helene Vivian turned her head and whispered in Beligaju's ear. Look, those little palace maids are shy. Don't move. Beligaju never had anyone else in his eyes. Even more so now. He calmly held down the person in his arms who didn't know what was good for her. His magnetic voice was pleasant to hear. Which one do you want to eat, the bun or the youtiao? Chapter 640. Helene Vivian felt that His Highness was disrespecting her more and more. He was lecturing her in front of the palace maids, and didn't give her any face at all. No, she had to resist today. What are you doing? Can you not interrupt me at such a crucial time? Helene Vivian was complaining in her heart when Beligaju put the bun into her mouth. She originally wanted to refuse in an imposing manner, but the aroma of the noodles quickly rushed to her nose. Helene Weiwei couldn't help but take a bite. The noodles were made with mushrooms and meat, and there were even shrimps inside. The noodles of the steamed bun were very authentic, and when it entered her mouth, it was very chewy. Helene Weiwei's eyes couldn't help but light up, and immediately ate obediently. Forget it, sooner or later, he would like her to the point that he couldn't help himself. At that time, she would order him around. This meat bun was really good. Helene Vivian accepted the man's feeding naturally, and her eyes narrowed happily. As she ate, she imagined what His Highness would look like when His Highness didn't dare to resist no matter what she wanted him to do. Her heart was extremely happy, and she couldn't help but clench her little fists. This was her life goal from now on. After Bailey Jiaju saw her actions, his eyes flashed with a trace of a smile. His hand also followed and reached over, getting a little closer. The person in front of him ate like a well-behaved little fox. After retracting her claws, she was very obedient. That pair of eyes were sparkling. So much so that she did not even care that the meat bun was being held in his hand. This kind of posture was so intimate. When she opened her mouth to bite, the tip of her tongue brushed past the touch of his finger, which made a certain highness feel very satisfied. After breakfast, Helene Weiwei was sleepy. While she was still in his arms, she sat on his lap and yawned. She did not look like a cat. She looked like a dog, or even a husky. Her fluffy ahogue stood up on the top of her head, which was very iconic. Beligaju looked at her appearance, and the smile on his face became wider. He kissed the corner of his pet's mouth, then picked her up and put her on the bed. Hellion Vivian originally thought that he was going to work after putting her down. Unexpectedly, in the next moment, she was pulled into an embrace filled with a pleasant smell. The man patted her back with his fingers and rested his chin on her head, patting her every now and then. Hellion Vivian felt comfortable. She reached out and hugged the man's strong waist. She sniffed the unique sandalwood scent and turned her face. "Hurry up and sleep." Beligaju whispered orders into her ear. His voice was as elegant and cold as ever, but his actions were gentle. He gently planted a kiss on her forehead. Hellion Vivian's eyes were still closed. Every time she was in his arms again, the feeling was different. The strong and steady heartbeat beside her ear overlapped with hers, making Hellion Vivian feel a sense of peace that she had never felt before. While she was half asleep, Hellion Vivian heard someone reporting outside. "Your Highness, the Xianyuan Kingdom's envoy has entered the capital." Shadow was brave enough to say this. No one dared to disturb his master at this time. Eunuch Sun was not here, so this life-threatening task was transferred to him. Hellion Vivian asked sleepily, "Is something the matter?" Beligaju patted her back again and coaxed her like he was coaxing a child. "Nothing, sleep for a while more." Hellion Vivian raised the 2 strands of hair on her head. She did not understand and her eyes were very heavy. She turned her face to the side and planned to continue sleeping. Beligaju was not satisfied with her escaping from his arms and pulled her back. "Sleep here." Hellion Vivian also liked the 2 of them lying together. It was just that she subconsciously felt that he had something to do, so she turned her face to the side. Now that she was back in the warmest embrace, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Her breathing was so soft that it was almost like she was blowing bubbles. Shadow could not hear the movements inside and did not dare to continue speaking. He lowered his head and waited outside the room. Bailey Jiaju coaxed her to sleep again before he lifted the curtain embroidered with dragons and phoenixes soaring through the clouds. Draped in a pure black fur cloak, he strolled out and said, "We've entered the capital." Shadow lowered his head. The informants in the capital reported that this time, the Xianyuan Kingdom's crown prince is not the only one accompanying them. It seems like they are planning to do something. This Highness understands. Beligaju's side profile looked indifferent and perfect. According to the customs of the past, since the envoys have entered the capital, we will first collect the tribute and then discuss the matter. Shadow lowered his eyes and replied, "Yes." When the Xianyuan Kingdom's envoy heard the news from the palace, his face was polite, but he couldn't help but sneer in his heart. This 3rd prince still thinks that the War Dragon Empire is the same as before, daring to mention the tribute. When Elder Suwu heard this, he stroked his beard. "It seems that we have taken Beligaju, who possesses the world's #1 martial chi, too seriously. He can fight wars, but he doesn't understand the friendly relations between nations at all. When he enters the palace tonight, he will know how foolish he is to mention the tribute." If Little Seven had heard this, she would definitely roll her eyes at Elder Suwu. Why would Master need to be friendly? There was no such thing as neighboring countries or not, only subordinate countries. If they were disobedient, he would beat them to death. This was the way his 3rd brother had taught him since he was young. That night, it was snowing heavily in the capital. The branches were covered with beautiful white flowers, and the sky was a vast expanse of white. When some of the more conservative ministers heard that the royal family had mentioned the tribute, they were very nervous, but they didn't dare to ask directly. Not only were they anxious, but when they saw the Xianyuan Kingdom's envoy, they were even more polite. Xiong watched from the side and snorted heavily. If he had to say, His Highness had done this very well. Regardless of the current state of the imperial court, they couldn't allow others to bully them. In the sleeping quarters, the palace servants carried things and walked back and forth in an orderly manner. Although they were busy, there wasn't the slightest bit of chaos. They were all dressed up for Hellion Vivian. "The Princess Consort is so beautiful." When the little palace maid said this, she was sincere. Looking at the person in the mirror, who could take away one's soul with just a smile, she couldn't help but sigh. Her skin was white and delicate, and even carried a fragrance. Other than her looks, She had a languid temperament that no one could learn. When the princess consort looked at them again, she would always have a mischievous smile on her face. Her beautiful phoenix eyes were raised, making people's hearts beat faster. The little palace maid didn't know that in the past, Helene Vivian had worn men's clothing in the modern world. She was a living example of a military tycoon, proficient in all the 18 tricks to pick up girls. Otherwise, Chapter 641. She would not be able to take down His Highness so quickly. This was all because she had studied countless secrets of chasing after a wife. I am hungry. Helene Vivian flirted with the palace maids for a while before she started to act shamelessly again. She put her chin on the dressing table and covered her stomach with one hand. She looked pitiful yet handsome. I want to eat pork trotters, the stewed kind. The palace maid was only one eyebrow away from drawing Helene Vivian's eyebrows. She looked at her princess consort and felt like she was looking at her sister acting coquettishly. She pursed her lips and smiled at Qing Zhan, who was standing beside her. Sister Qing Zhan, look at the princess consort. As soon as she finished her sentence, she felt a cold breeze beside her ear. It was the master. Your Highness. The palace maids knelt in a row in panic. Baligaju did not look at them. Instead, he pinched Helene Vivian's chin, as if there was no one around. Are your claws restless again? No. Helene Vivian pushed him away and yawned. She wanted to waste more time. I am hungry. Bailey Jaju laughed. He took the fur cloak prepared by the palace maids and wrapped it around her body. Then, he carried her in his arms and said, Half an hour ago, you ate a pot of boiled fish by yourself. That was enough food for 3 people. But I am hungry again now, Helene Vivian said seriously. She tried to poke her face out of the fur cloak. Baligaju reached out and pressed her back. Helene Vivian was annoyed. What are you doing? Your face is too ugly. You need to do some work. Baligaju said calmly. He took some black pearls from somewhere and put some powder on her face. Only then did he put her down satisfactorily. Helene Vivian looked at herself in the bronze mirror. Her face was dark. Are you sure there is nothing wrong with your aesthetic standards? The palace maid's efforts of 2 hours were ruined by His Highness. Come here. Baligaju stood behind her and twirled the black jade ring on his finger with a faint smile. Helene Vivian walked over and raised her eyebrows slightly. She seemed to be asking, what else does he want to do? What she didn't expect was that the man actually smiled faintly and lowered his head. His slender fingers helped her roll up her drooping sleeves, revealing a circle of fox fur that was exquisitely made, which made her skin even fairer. The moment Baligaju bent down, the others held their breaths. They had also served many people, including the glamorous concubines and Empress Murong, who held the most power in the harem. However, none of them would be so cherished by their superiors. The third prince had been different from the other princes since he was young. Even if it was the emperor's order, he would make a decision based on his mood. Even the most honorable man in the world was nothing more than this. He was like a cloud in the sky, exuding a noble aura. Even the most beautiful woman would involuntarily submit in front of him. They originally thought that such a person would never know how to lower his head. But now, the palace servants' gazes fell on Baligaju, and there wasn't a single one that wasn't shocked. That kind of highness was too gentle, so gentle that it was almost breathtaking. Helene Vivian was also stunned. She just watched him roll up one sleeve for her, then the second one. From her angle, the curve of the man's mouth was indescribably gentle. His lips were very light, and the sunlight shone in. He was so handsome that it made her heart itch. Helene Vivian didn't even think. She leaned over to steal a kiss, then quickly stood still, as if nothing had happened. She was as shrewd as a little fox. Baligaju raised his head and saw her like this. He bent his slender fingers and tapped her forehead. Then, while he was tying the chain around her waist, he leaned over to her ear and asked with a wicked smile, You want it? Helene Vivian. When dinner is over, I will satisfy you. As soon as Bailey Jaju finished speaking, he straightened his body and led the people outside the room out. His tall and slender back gave off a strong aura of an emperor. Helene Vivian didn't even have a chance to explain. What did he mean by she wanted it? She just kissed him. Just a kiss, and he thought so much. Beast. But to be able to sleep with such a handsome man, it was considered a gain. Helene Vivian thought about it, and her mood improved again. Her stomach was still hungry, so she reached out and touched it. She walked to the wooden window and put her finger on her lips. With a handsome whistle, the shadowy mercenary kneeled on the ground. Eldest Mississippi, how's the investigation? Helene Vivian curved her thin lips. At this moment, she looked much more dangerous than when she was in front of Beligaju. The mercenary lowered his head and thought that their eldest miss had probably given all her good intentions to the royal family and put all her bad intentions on others. Other than the people from the Xianyuan kingdom, the people from the Huangzi kingdom and Yuanzhong kingdom are also on their way. What are they planning to do? Unite the three kingdoms? Helene Vivian smiled. The mercenary knew that his eldest miss had always been smart. He nodded and said, the Huangzi kingdom and Yuanzhong kingdom aren't very strong. This time, they are openly provoking us. It's puzzling. What's there to be puzzled about? It's obvious that the Xianyuan kingdom gave them benefits. Helene Vivian yawned and the smile on her face turned cold. They won't wake up early if there's no benefit. They thought that the War Dragon Empire would be in a panic after the emperor died. They want to take advantage of this situation to get a share of the soup. That's why they are coming to the capital together. After hearing this, the mercenary's heart sank. That's bad. This time, they are using the divine exorcism seal in the capital as an excuse. They are saying that there's a loophole in the seal here, and that they need to send people to guard the city. Hey, they're dreaming. Helene Vivian laughed coldly. The royal family won't agree. The mercenary grunted in agreement. It's because the royal family won't agree that the people from the Xianyuan kingdom called the people from the other two kingdoms over. I don't know what they want to do. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Why should we care about them? Helene Vivian pressed her left hand on her neck and moved it back and forth. There was an indescribable evil in her voice. Since they came to my War Dragon Empire, we have to make them leave something behind before letting them go. Otherwise, I'll lose face as a military tycoon. Mercenary. You can just say that you want to steal money, that's enough. Miss, we really don't lack money. Can you not do this? All right. Cancel that thing I asked you to do last time. Helene Vivian seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly turned her head and instructed the mercenary. The royal family doesn't like to accompany people. They won't do it no matter how much money they have. Sigh, I can't force them. Mercenary. He didn't have the guts to take it to heart. Making the royal family accompany people. This is a method that only Miss can think of. Chapter 642. Since we can't make a deal, let's make that Princess Xianyuan give up. Helene Vivian looked at her wrist slowly, and a bloodthirsty smile appeared on her thin lips. Tell her who Beligaju belongs to. Yes, the mercenary said faintly, and looked up at the sky. You've been planning to do this from the start. The appearance fee is all a lie. You just don't allow anyone to peek at the royal family. Helene Vivian admitted this point. She thought about it carefully. The soul fragment that she risked her life to get back through time and space was hers alone. It was fine for others to admire it or like it, but such an obvious provocation. Did they really think that she was easy to bully? The mercenary didn't leave. Seeing the coldness in his miss's eyes, he didn't know what would happen at the palace banquet tonight. He asked, do we need to call the general and the others over? No, it's called a one-hit kill. A group of people won't be able to show my imposing manner. Helene Vivian waved her hand. The mercenary's mouth twitched. Who was the one who said that they liked it when the other party had fewer people, and they had more people on their side? That way it would be easier to bully them. Now they were showing off their heroism. Little Black, don't say that your boss didn't teach you. Helene Weiwei smiled at him. When you're chasing someone, nothing else is important, but you have to know how to act cool. You guys are standing there and stealing my limelight. Bailey Jiaju won't know how handsome I am. The mercenary was speechless. Do you think the royal family is blind? Also, he's not called Little Black. Don't give him random nicknames. If you have the time to teach your subordinates those unreliable methods, why don't you be more obedient at night? The person who was being talked about just walked in from outside. He grabbed Helene Vivian's collar and pulled her far away from the window. His magnetic voice was filled with displeasure. It's snowing outside. Don't you know that it's cold? Helene Vivian touched her face. It's okay, it's not that cold. However, she said, how can you look down on my methods of chasing people? I'm at the level of a god. Do you understand? The man was obviously dismissive of her words. He held her hand and drilled into his inner shirt. Helene Vivian shouted, "You're acting like a hooligan in broad daylight. If you keep yelling like a ghost, I'll throw you out." Beligage's voice was very calm. It was obvious that he wasn't lying. Helene Vivian calmed down under his cold gaze. She did not move and allowed Beligaju to put her hand on his chest. It was so warm. The skin on her palm was very hot. Not only her hand, but even her heart seemed to be warm. The palace servants were still waiting at the side. When they saw this scene, they all lowered their heads. Everyone was moved and envious. Wang Fei was the only one in the world who could make His Highness do this. However, His Highness raised Wang Fei as if she was a child. He was very controlling. No one knew if this was a good thing or a bad thing. At this moment, Beligaju was looking at Helene Vivian lazily. His long eyes were full of warning. If I see you standing at the window without an outer shirt next time, I'll break your pair of claws. I know. I'm just going to discuss something with Xiaohei. Helene Vivian defended herself. She was about to retract her hand. Don't let it get cold. Don't you have a hand warmer? Hearing this, Qing Zhan immediately placed the heater beside the two of them. Beligaju did not take it. Instead, he held Helene Vivian's wrist as usual. When her pair of claws were not cold, he took it over and ordered the people waiting outside. Go and prepare the banquet. Yes, they replied in unison, and there was an echo in their voices. Pa! The snow on the trees fell and hit the golden roof. The exquisite and expensive decorations in the palace reflected the glossy marble. It gave off a mysterious and solemn feeling. All of this was because of Beligaju, who was sitting on the dragon throne. Unlike the previous emperor who took pills for many years, he exuded the aura of a king from head to toe. He was elegant, cruel, indifferent, and evil. Even if he was wearing a long fur coat, one could still feel his tall and straight back. His muscles were clear and strong. The pure and resolute aura of an ancient aristocrat was expressed on his body. It was the elegance that was accumulated over time. Beligaju looked a little indifferent. However, when the corner of his mouth twitched, the aura that could not be ignored quickly infected his handsome face. It was as if he was born to rule the darkness. He reclined on the dragon throne and swirled the glass in his hand. Under the candlelight, the liquid looked particularly alluring. When he heard the envoys from Huangzi country and Yuanzhong country enter, Beligaju narrowed his eyes. He did not look away from the glass. Instead, he elegantly raised it to his nose and sniffed. The two envoys were followed by their own exorcists. When they saw Beligaju acting like this, they sneered in their hearts. This third prince probably did not know anything. That was why he was so indifferent. In their opinion, the War Dragon Empire could only go down the path of political marriage. Otherwise, no matter how powerful the empire was, if they did not handle this matter well, everything would be in vain. This one represents Huangzi country. This one represents Yuanzhong country. Greetings to the royal. The envoys placed their left hand on their right shoulder. They looked very well behaved, but there was an ambiguous meaning behind those rules. In their impression, the War Dragon Empire's fifth prince was the one who truly understood the political situation. If the War Dragon Empire's emperor had not suddenly passed away, the third prince would not have been the one to take charge of this matter. Originally, they were wary of this person's title of number one in the world. Now, it seemed that there was no need to worry at all. Martial qi and exorcism were two different things. It had nothing to do with politics. If the fifth prince was in charge, he would definitely not act like this. He would be courteous and treat them as distinguished guests. The emperor had passed away early, and the evidence in the court was not stable. The biggest taboo was to anger the surrounding countries. Although the current war dragon empire looked the same as before on the surface. However, no one would believe that there was not a little bit of trouble in this matter. The thoughts of the officials were a hurdle. The generals who held military power were another hurdle. The third prince probably did not realize it yet. That was why he was showing off like this. When the Xianyuan country's people arrived, the third prince would know that this visit would not be as simple as before. The envoys were led to their seats by the palace servants. The two of them looked at each other, and more or less revealed a smile and contempt that only the other could understand. Hellion Vivian, who was sitting in the back seat, saw this scene and slightly raised her eyebrows. Her fingers tapped on the armrest of the chair, and there was a thick playfulness in her lazy appearance. Chapter 643. When the old officials of the conservative faction saw His Highness like this, they were anxious. They wanted to talk to the two emissaries, so that they wouldn't be dissatisfied. They raised their cups and said, "Sirs, you must be tired from the long journey. You must be tired, right? Are you tired or not? It's just that the capital city is not as lively as the rumors say. When we entered the city, there weren't many hawkers." The envoy said with a smile. He was implying that the War Dragon Empire's national power was not as strong as the rumors said. How could the old ministers not understand the underlying meaning? They were afraid that they would hurt the harmony if they rebutted him. So they pretended not to understand and smiled. Baligaju did not have any expression on his face. He only smiled and drank a mouthful of wine in his cup, then glanced in the direction of the minister. For some reason the minister shuddered. Since Lord Gu can't answer the question, Baligaju played with the white jade porcelain cup in his hand and said faintly, "Then there's no need to attend the banquet. Take him away." The last three words made the atmosphere in the hall extremely cold. The two envoys were stunned as well. For a moment, they forgot what they were supposed to say. The minister with the surname Gu did not know what he did wrong. The shadow guards rushed up and took off the plume on his head. "Your Highness, Your Highness!" Listening to the noise beside her ear, Wei Wei wasn't the least bit surprised that this would be the result. The emissary didn't come with good intentions, yet this one surnamed Gu still rushed up to curry favor. This was simply losing face for the War Dragon Empire. A certain highness would definitely want this person's life, without a doubt. Baligaju did not have any expression. He still had a faint smile on his face, as if he was not the one who wanted to kill someone. The two envoys felt their scalps stiffen. Why was the third prince so strange? The exorcist sitting beside them did not see the undercurrent and continued to smile. Could it be that the capital city is so bleak because of the seal? Plus, there is no way to solve it. Lu Yu felt that the direction of the conversation was getting more and more out of hand. He was so angry that his face turned green. It was all that Gugai's fault. He made them lose the initiative and forced the other party to such an extent. The two emissaries also laughed and were about to speak. "Little Seven, tell them why there are so few people on the streets of the capital." The ministers heard the noise and looked up. They saw Hellion Vivian supporting her face with one hand and smiling lazily. Her eyes were deep. The little one held a meat bun in his hand, as if he did not care about this question at all. It's getting cold. Who would still be wandering outside? Everyone is doing business in the tea house. Why can't these people understand such a simple principle? What a waste of time. Hearing this, Hellion Wei Wei immediately assumed the posture of a judge. "Little Seven, how many times have I taught you? Don't look down on others just because their country is small, and they don't know much. We need to be broad-minded." "I'm very handsome and very broad." Little Seven nodded obediently. "I don't laugh at them." The two emissaries, saying that their country was small and inexperienced, was considered broad-minded. Wasn't this scolding them in a roundabout way? And he said that he was not laughing at them. The exorcists were so angry that they were about to stand up. The two emissaries stopped them and said in a deep voice, "Don't be rash. Are we just going to let them say whatever they want? The exorcists had never been treated like this before. Their faces were full of anger. Hellion Vivian looked at them from above and smiled gently. What's wrong with the two emissaries? Why are you standing up? The emissaries gritted their teeth. They thought to themselves, what's wrong with us? Don't you know? Where did this woman come from? Why is she so infuriating? Is there something wrong with what little Seven said just now? Hellion Weiwei picked up the teacup in her hand, her voice somewhat absent-minded. He's still young, innocent and childish. With the tolerance of the two countries, he shouldn't bicker with a child, right? No, they would. The Huangzi nation's emissary gritted his teeth as he uttered those words. The exorcists were still unwilling to give up. The emissary whispered in their ears, "Are you really going to argue with a child? Didn't you hear the word tolerance? If this continues, we'll be the ones losing face." The exorcists clenched their fists and could only sit down with sullen expressions. The two emissaries were also a little upset. They had wanted to use this opportunity to provoke the other party, but they did not expect that they would be the ones to be humiliated in the end. However, what they did not expect was that this was not the end of it. Hellion Vivian looked at one of the exorcists. "Didn't you glare at our little Seven just now?" The exorcists ignored her and snorted coldly. Hellion Vivian smiled slowly and said coldly, "Apologize." "What did you say?" Before the exorcists could say anything, Hellion Vivian interrupted him. "Lord Wang, this exorcist is a citizen of Huangzi country. Did your country not teach him how to behave in front of people? Little Seven is the seventh prince of the War Dragon dynasty. His status is far above his, yet he is so arrogant. Such an unruly person will only end up in the War Dragon dynasty, and that is death." Hellion Weiwei said the last word with a smile on her face. The Huangzi country emissary froze. The exorcists were so angry that their eyes were about to spit fire. Hellion Vivian continued in an indifferent tone. "Of course, different countries have different rules. Visitors are guests. I don't know how your country teaches people, but at the very least, our War Dragon dynasty will not bully children." The emissary opened his mouth. "Huangzi country will not. Our little Seven has always been timid. He can't stand being scared." Hellion Vivian did not listen to what he had to say. She glanced at the little one after she finished speaking. The little one immediately lowered his head and rubbed his tiger eyes with his small hands. His shoulders began to tremble slightly, and he looked pitiful as if saying, "The whole world has hurt me." The exorcists widened their eyes. Just now, this child did not look scared at all. Why did he change his expression so quickly? "Sigh, look at how scared the child is." Hellion Vivian sighed deeply and hugged the little one. "Little Seven, don't cry. Lord Wang knows what to do." The emissary's expression could no longer be described with words. The muscles on his jaw twitched violently. He clenched his fists and growled, "Yuelu." Apologize to the seventh prince. Chapter 644. What? The exorcist named Yu Lu turned around abruptly to look at the messenger who brought them here. The messenger lowered his voice and said, "The citizens of the Four Kingdoms have witnessed the pilgrimage. If you don't apologize, what do you think the Huangzi Kingdom's reputation will be? Everyone will say that we bullied their child. Compared to an apology, which one do you think will have a greater impact on our kingdom?" But he clearly, Yu Lu looked at Messenger Wang's expression. No matter how angry he was, he could only hold it in. His face turned red as he said to the little one, "I'm sorry." The three words were so cold that they seemed to have been ground out. It was enough to show his unwillingness. But so what if he was unwilling? He was still humiliated in front of everyone. The expressions of the messengers were no longer as relaxed as when they first arrived. Even the smile on their faces were a little stiff. Lu Yu glanced at the seat of honor. Her eyes were shining. The third princess consort's trick was brilliant. Beligaju was also looking at Hellion Vivian. However, there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth, as if he was saying, "Aren't you shameless?" Hellion Vivian understood and replied softly, "I learned this from you." Besides, they were the ones who were shameless and bullied our little seventh prince first. Yes, they bullied me. The little one nodded happily. Shadow was very conflicted as he watched from the side. He had been in the palace for so many years, but he had never seen anyone really bully the seventh prince. It was already good enough that he didn't go and beat up others. Also, what cowardice! Was that really the seventh prince who would cause trouble wherever he went? He needed to digest the news that he had just heard. Of course, the messengers would not give up just like that. Since they had suffered a verbal setback, they would definitely seek revenge elsewhere. Let them be smug for a while. Once the people from the Xianyuan kingdom arrive, they will not be able to laugh anymore. By then, we will have the final say. While holding a cup, Lord Wang whispered into the angry Yulu's ear. There are not many people in the War Dragon Empire who know the art of yin and yang. Teaching them a lesson is like playing a game. Yulu gulped down a mouthful of wine and put down the cup. A sinister look flashed across his eyes. After persuading him, the emissary stood up and said politely, Royal family, Huangzi country has always stood aloof from worldly affairs and has always served the people wholeheartedly. Now that we have heard that the seal in the capital is in danger, we have rushed here overnight, hoping to save the people from this calamity. I wonder if the royal family will give us this opportunity? Hearing this, Beligage's ink-black eyes flashed with a strange vastness, as if he was pondering. Then he crossed his arms and supported his chin. The corners of his mouth slowly curled into an ice-cold smile. Lord Wang, how do you want me to give you this opportunity? Of course, our country will contribute. We will send the most elite exorcists and escort cavalry to be stationed near the capital. Seeing that he had taken the bait, the emissary said passionately, Royal family, there is no need to be so courteous. This is a special situation, and the four countries should join forces to deal with it. Beligaju listened to the emissary's words and twirled the ring on his finger. He smiled evilly. Lord Wang, if something happens to Huangzi country, I can lead the troops directly to attack. After all, it is just to help. I heard that the fourth prince of Huangzi country has recently taken a liking to kidnapping women. Aning, go to the military field and gather the troops. We will set off tomorrow to help the emperor discipline his son. What do you think of this idea? The emissary's face changed color back and forth. His fingers trembled, but he couldn't refute a single word. Other than the other party's eloquence, the other party's eyes were too cold. Looking at the man like that, the emissary felt as if he had fallen into hell. Everywhere was cold. At this moment, a clear and magnetic voice suddenly came from outside the hall. This idea is indeed inappropriate. Hearing this, everyone turned to look in the direction of the voice. A man in a green shirt and a white robe walked into the hall. Behind him was a row of people. Other than the emissary, there was also a man dressed like an elder. The man had a sharp face. His long black hair was draped over his fur coat, and he wore a white jade earring in his ear. He had a tall nose bridge and thin lips. His aura was luxurious, especially his eyes, which were as dark as the deep sea, and carried a strong sense of bewitchment. He walked to the center of the hall with a smile that was neither light nor heavy on his face. However, compared to personal gain, saving the people from water and fire is the attitude that a leader should have. We can think of other ways, but the most important thing is how to solve the current problem in the capital. It's the Crown Prince of Xianyuan Kingdom, Zongjingwen. Someone couldn't help but exclaim after seeing the man. It was obvious that everyone gasped when they heard the name Zongjingwen. Even Hellion Vivian didn't raise her head to look at the man standing in the center. Zongjingwen, a famous handsome man, was the designated successor of the Xianyuan Kingdom. He had attained the gold-level martial qi long ago. It was said that he was as strong as Beligaju. Compared to Beligaju's indifferent and low-key personality, Zongjingwen had always been in charge of his own country. He had been the crown prince for a long time. Not only was he skilled in martial qi, but he was also the best at governing a country. Most importantly, he was also an exorcist. Zongjingwen smiled gently and turned his head. He continued, Elder, tell me about your thoughts on our journey to the War Dragon Dynasty. Resentful spirits are haunting the road, and the livestock are restless. Elder Suwu stroked his beard. The qi in the capital city has reached its limit. If there are no exorcists to help, the seal will be completely destroyed in less than a month. When that time comes, demons will run amok, and the human world will cease to exist. Royal, for the sake of the world, the Xianyuan kingdom will not back down. I'm sure the other 2 neighboring countries will do the same. Ambassador Wang immediately agreed. That's right. The matter of the seal is imminent. We must act immediately. Elder Suwu smiled and said, if the royal is worried about a rebellion, there is a solution. As long as the 2 families become in-laws, everything will be solved. Baligaju didn't say anything. He just turned his head and rested his chin on his hand. He looked at Hellion Vivian and smiled. Her beautiful face was a little seductive. He mainly wanted to see the expression on his pet's face. To his disappointment, the little fox was very calm. Hellion Vivian's face was expressionless, but her eyes were cold. The little 7th prince sensed the atmosphere around him. He took a valiant step forward and began to rub his fists. He thought to himself, if 3rd sister-in-law can't hold it in and beats him up, he would rush over and secretly give him a kick. Chapter 645. However, the ministers did not share the same thoughts. They initially thought that there was no other way. Once the 3 nations arrived, they would definitely be besieged. They did not expect the other party to propose a marriage alliance. Their eyes lit up as if they had seen hope. Someone stepped forward and said to Elder Suwu with a smile, the War Dragon Empire and the Xianyuan Kingdom have always had a close relationship. It would be great if we could strengthen our ties through marriage. Elder Suwu smiled when he heard this. Lord Qin is right. The 2 of them chatted back and forth, and it was quite a warm atmosphere. Zongjing Wenrun did not listen to what the people below were saying. He stood tall and straight, and looked at Bailey Jiaju, who was sitting in the seat of honor. He slowly opened his mouth and said, Brother Bailey, Wenrun has arrived on time for the 3-year promise. Zongjing Wenrun smiled elegantly, but if one listened carefully, one would realize that there was a hint of provocation in his tone. Hellion Weiwei listened from the side, and heaved a long sigh. Youngster, you can't be like this. Not only is His Highness a clean freak, he also has mild face blindness. He simply won't remember any 3 years promise. Sure enough, within Bailey Jiaju's pair of beautiful eyes, there wasn't the slightest ripple. He only raised the corner of his eyes, his left hand supporting the armrest of the chair, unhurriedly opened his mouth. Within the clear coldness, there was a unique grace. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Even Zongjing Wenrun could not help but clench his fists when faced with this question. The anger in his eyes deepened. Is this man trying to intimidate me? Even if he has forgotten about me, someone has just mentioned my name. How dare he ask me who I am? Hellion Vivian held back her laughter and reminded him. He is the crown prince of the Xianyuan kingdom. Oh. Baligaju supported his face with one hand and furrowed his brows. It was as if he was trying to recall who the crown prince of the Xianyuan kingdom was. Zongjing Wenren's eyes turned cold. He maintained his smile and said, It seems that Brother Bailey has finally remembered. I was still looking forward to having a match with you, so that we can determine who is better. Baligaju held his chin and curved his thin lips. As you wish. Hellion Vivian watched as Zongjing Wenren slowly sat down. She turned to look at Baligaju and asked, Do you really remember who he is? No. Baligaju absent-mindedly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger, and the smile at the corner of his mouth had a hint of black-bellied flavor. But from what he said, he should be a defeated opponent. Upon hearing this, Zongjing Wenren, who was seated below, tightened his grip on the porcelain cup in his hand, and turned to look at Elder Suwu. Elder Suwu narrowed his eyes and was about to speak. He heard Hellion Vivian say, Oh, then don't worry about it. Elder Suwu could barely maintain the gentleness on his face. What did he mean by don't worry about it? Was this woman looking down on the crown prince? Or was she looking down on the Xianyuan kingdom? Lord Chen was afraid that the two sides would quarrel again like they had with the Huangzi kingdom. After all, the Xianyuan kingdom was different from the other two neighboring countries. Their yin-yang exorcism technique was renowned throughout the world, and they could not be easily offended. Hence he hurriedly said, "Elder Su Wu, I heard that on the day the princess was born, the light of Buddha descended from the heavens, and thousands of beasts roared in unison. Even the drought-stricken lands were nourished by holy water from the heavens. The princess herself is as beautiful as a fairy, and is fated with Buddha. On the day the Xianyuan kingdom entered the capital, the informants in the capital had spotted a young girl in the midst of the entourage. Furthermore, the Xianyuan kingdom's princess had a crush on Baligaju, and all the officials had heard of it. With a little deduction, they knew that the Xianyuan princess had followed them here. Lord Chen's question was also intended to give the Xianyuan kingdom a way out, so that they could invite the princess to meet them. Elder Su Wu naturally accepted this and laughed heartily. I didn't expect the princess's name to have spread to the War Dragon dynasty. Kanju, go and invite the princess over. Yes, if one did not look closely, the girl named Kanju would have thought that she was a teenager, because she was also wearing an exorcist's white robe. Before she left, she glanced in the direction of Hellion Vivian, and her eyes were full of meaning. The little one understood the meaning behind her gaze, and leaned over to Hellion Vivian, and whispered into her ear. Third sister-in-law, I'm really not the one to cause trouble. That woman just now was looking down on you on behalf of her princess. Hellion Vivian lowered her head and smiled. She tapped the little one with her finger, and fed him a piece of date cake. She asked, who's more handsome, you or that crown prince? Of course third sister-in-law is more handsome. The little one held the date cake in his mouth and said firmly, no one dares to court death in front of third brother. Third sister-in-law, you're the first. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Was this still considered a compliment? The little one stopped talking when he saw the jujube cake. He squatted beside Hellion Weiwei's feet obediently with a pair of tiger-like eyes. He looked down, and took a bite of the jujube cake. He was so adorable. Hellion Vivian hugged him, but he did not get up. She said that squatting like this was domineering. As an ancient divine beast, he had to squat like this. Elder Su Wu watched this scene, and laughed coldly in his heart. He wondered how such a stupid third princess consort had managed to marry Baligaju. He said to Lord Chen, who was in the same camp as them, the third princess consort is really naive. Lord Chen did not respond. He knew what Elder Su Wu was talking about. The third princess consort was obviously rude to a foreign envoy. If it had been in the past, he would have agreed with Elder Su Wu. But now, after witnessing how terrifying that woman's combat skills were, he did not dare to say anything. However, this time, he could start from another angle. He had received benefits from the Xianyuan kingdom, and had said what he should say. He had kept the things that he should not say to himself. He would not meddle in the rest, and would only help from the sidelines. It should not be too obvious. Lord Chen was deep in thought when he looked up, and was met with a pair of eyes that made his scalp tingle. He did not know if it was an illusion, but when he met the gaze of the royal family, he felt that there was a cold red light in that pair of long, narrow eyes. Lord Chen shuddered in fear, and took a step back. Elder Su Wu helped him up and asked in confusion, Lord Chen? Lord Chen finally regained his senses, and exclaimed in surprise. He looked up at the seat of honor. The man's smile was languid and elegant, as if everything that had happened was just an illusion. Lord Chen heaved a sigh of relief. He had really scared himself. He had been in contact with the Xianyuan kingdom, since the late emperor had just ascended the throne. Even the emperor had not noticed anything, so it was even more impossible for the third prince to notice anything strange. Moreover, the suggestion he was making now was all for the sake of the War Dragon dynasty. It was normal for the royal family to have political marriages. Lord Chen was deep in thought when he heard a loud announcement from outside the hall. The Xianyuan princess has arrived. Chapter 646. In an instant, all the officials turned to look at the door and saw a slender lady slowly walking in. She was dressed in a white fox fur coat with flower-like sleeves. Her petite and perfect face was only the size of a palm. She looked like a budding magnolia flower. She was untainted from head to toe and exuded a kind of pure and graceful beauty. She was the kind of lady that all men would like. Perhaps it was the nature of men that made them like this kind of delicate and soft lady the most. Yor greets the third prince. The lady's manner carried a Jiangnan vibe. Her gentleness did not lose its elegance. Many people were dumbfounded. When they heard the lady's voice, they gasped in amazement. Her voice was like a light drizzle that fell into their ears. The officials started to talk among themselves. Even the exorcists from the other two countries had their eyes fixed on Zongjing Yu'er. It was as if they were mesmerized by her beauty. Zongjing Yu'er smiled and lowered her head shyly. Her eyes never left the tall and outstanding figure, sitting in the seat of honor. Lord Chen shook his head in amazement. Truly, seeing is believing. Princess Yu'er's celestial beauty is rare in the world. You flatter me. Elder Su Wu stood in front of Zongjing Yu'er and stroked his beard. The old-fashioned officials finally came to their senses. Seeing that the atmosphere was good, they could not help but try to guess the royal's thoughts from the perspective of a man. It had been some time since the royal family married a wife. Although the third princess consort was not bad, she looked a little too competitive. After seeing too many of such women, one would definitely need an understanding flower to ease one's mind. Princess Xianyuan was beautiful and had a good figure. Coupled with her girlish shyness, who would not be moved by her beauty? Some of the officials turned their eyes and came to life. They sighed and said, His Highness has always served the country and the people. The princess looks gentle and attentive. They are a perfect match. Zongjing Yu'er listened from the side. Her face was full of shyness. She looked very pretty when she was quiet. Little Seven held the pastry in his mouth and looked around. To his surprise, Third Aunt did not react at all. Instead, she smiled lazily. There was an indescribable evil in her expression. The little one felt that it was time for him to say something. If he did not, those old men would really push that woman over. Third sister-in-law. The little one tugged at Hellion Vivian's sleeve and said with a fierce expression, Shouldn't we start now? Hellion Vivian rested her chin on her other hand and said with a smile, Don't touch me. I'm a civilized person. Lord Chen couldn't hear the conversation between the elder and the child. Seeing that there wasn't much movement, he smiled and continued to follow the words of his colleague. Indeed, they are a perfect match. If this matter can be settled, that would be great. Elder Su Wu smiled politely. At this moment, Zongjing Yu'er tugged at his sleeve and looked at him. Elder Su Wu understood what she meant and turned to look at Hellion Vivian. Whether or not this matter will succeed will depend on whether the third princess consort understands the bigger picture. Oh, Hellion Vivian was joking with the little one. When she heard someone mention her name, she raised her eyebrows lazily. Zongjing Yu'er did not want to make things too awkward. She knew that Hellion Vivian had a special feeling for that person, so she tugged at Elder Su Wu's sleeve and said, Elder sister, I haven't seen you for 5 years. I thought that you would marry into the Morong family. I didn't expect you to be in the palace. Hellion Vivian frowned when she heard this. Judging from the Xianyuan princess's words, it seemed that they knew each other. However, she did not have any memory of Xianyuan princess. Could it be that Zongjing Yu'er had met the original Hellion Vivian when she was searching for the soul fragment? Elder sister, you should know that I've admired His Highness since I was a child. After so many years, I have never changed. When Zongjing Yu'er said this, her cheeks were pink and she looked very shy. When the exorcists heard this, they could not help but feel envious. They did not expect that there would be a woman who could publicly express her love for the third prince. How many lifetimes must it have taken for the third prince to have such good fortune? I hope that elder sister will grant my wish. Zongjing Yu'er bit her thin lips and looked very pitiful. When the bystanders saw this, they could not help but feel their hearts soften. Third princess consort, please accept Princess Yu'er's wish. The envoy from Huangzi Nation had just been humiliated by Hellion Vivian. Now that he wanted to regain his dignity, he smiled warmly and said, "Third Princess Consort, do you have the heart to deny such a touching love?" Hellion Vivian glanced at the envoy and stood up slowly. With a flick of her fingers, she removed the hooded cloak on her head and threw it on her chair, revealing her stunning face. She was wearing an exorcist's robe underneath, but there was a white fur coat around her shoulders. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was tall and slender, and the corners of her mouth were curved. Her aura was fierce and outstanding. Just by raising her eyebrows, she could cause the surrounding people to gasp. Zongjing Wenren's hand, which was holding the teacup, paused. It was as if there was only this figure left in his eyes. If Zongjing Yuer's beauty was refreshing like water, Hellion Vivian's beauty was captivating and enchanting. At first glance, it was enough to leave an unforgettable impression. In addition to her voice and appearance, there was a languid and mischievous air that was different from other girls. One could not help but stare at her again and again until they lost their minds. It was not that Zongjing Wenren had never seen Hellion Vivian before. Back then, she was still young and spoke softly. This time, when he looked at her again, her eyes were as bright as stars, and she walked as if there was no one around. It was as if she was a completely different person. She was so dazzling that the entire magnificent hall became a foil to her. The emissary from Huangzi Nation did not expect Hellion Weiwei to grow up to be so beautiful. Even when they were talking just now, she was standing at a high vantage point and far away. Her hooded cloak covered her face, so he could only see her chin at most. Now that Hellion Weiwei had walked over, the closer she got, the more beautiful her breathtaking face became. The surroundings were so quiet that not a single sound could be heard. Even Zongjing Yuer did not expect her to be so beautiful. She bit her thin lips and said, "Sister." Hellion Weiwei stopped in front of her and tilted her head slightly. She was not looking at her, but at Zongjing Wenren, who was sitting beside her. "Crown Prince, does everyone in the Xianyuan kingdom have this kind of hobby? Do you like to be someone's concubine?" As soon as she said this, Zongjing Wenren, Zongjing Yuer, and Elder Su Wu's expressions were extremely ugly. Hellion Vivian smiled and continued, "Zongjing Yuer, right? You want me to fulfill your wish? You even accused me of not knowing the bigger picture. Why, before you fell for Beligaju, didn't you know that he was already married?" Chapter 647. Zongjing Yuer was not afraid of her saying that. She was already prepared for this. With reddened eyes, she immediately straightened her back and refused to back down. "I like him. Even if he has you, I can still accept it. For him, I'm willing to do anything." Hearing this, everyone present was moved by the girl's deep feelings. It was indeed a lot for a princess to lower herself to such a level. Moreover, Zongjing Yuer's eyes were already welling up with tears. Many men were touched and softened. Hellion Vivian glanced at the crowd and knew what they were thinking. She smiled coldly and said, "You want to talk about feelings with me? Among all the feelings in the world, there are those who are willing to sacrifice themselves to save others. There are those who are willing to spend thousands of years with a single glance. There are also those who are willing to sacrifice themselves to put out the fire. However, none of these feelings are destructive or intrusive. Zongjing Yuer, since your brother won't teach you, let me, an outsider, teach you. What you did was not love. You did it because you wanted to establish a chastity. Haha, you said that even if Beligaju had me, you could still accept it. You ruined others' lives, and still have the courage to brag about your thick skin. It's rare." Hellion Vivian's last sentence embarrassed Zongjing Yuer. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. Her whole body was trembling, as if she was being bullied. The exorcists of the Xianyuan dynasty immediately stood up and shouted, "Third Princess Consort, don't go too far." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said, "Why? You're embarrassing yourself, and you won't let others talk about it?" "Princess Consort." Lord Chun was the closest to Hellion Vivian. He said with a pleading tone, "His Highness hasn't said anything yet. Let's wait." Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. She seemed to have changed her mind. She looked at him with a smile and said, "Lord Chun, you mean to let His Highness handle this matter?" The official surnamed Chun had been an official for many years and understood the mentality of this kind of concubine the best. It was obvious that she wanted to use the fact that she was favored to prevent His Highness from conferring concubines again. However, she did not consider that the other party was the princess of the Xianyuan kingdom. No matter what, His Highness had to consider the bigger picture. Even if he did not consider the bigger picture, Zongjing Yu'er was beautiful and had deep feelings for His Highness. Which man would not want her? When Lord Chen thought of this, he straightened his posture and said, "Of course, the royal family is in charge of such an important matter." Zongjing Wenren glanced at Helene Vivian before he shifted his gaze to Elder Su Wu. Elder Su Wu received the order and immediately smiled. He stepped forward and said loudly to Beligaju, "Your Highness, if Your Highness is willing to accept the marriage, I hope that Your Highness will show your attitude. I heard that Your Highness has been married for so long, but there has been no movement from the Princess Consort. If Your Highness likes such a woman, you can keep her. However, Princess Yu'er has been noble since she was young and has never served anyone. How can a princess be a concubine? It is better to leave this position for someone else." The little one frowned when he heard this. Did this old man mean that third sister-in-law should be a concubine? What a joke. Of course, once the royal family agrees, these exorcists will be under Your Highness' command. Elder Su Wu was all smiles. He believed that Bailey Jiaju would not reject his offer. After all, the current War Dragon dynasty could not do without the help of the Xianyuan kingdom. When Helene Vivian heard this, she tilted her head and smiled. She twirled her long hair with her fingers, looking somewhat nonchalant. Zongjing Yu'er was originally very happy, but when she saw that smile, she felt very displeased. At the same time, she felt extremely embarrassed and angry. The light in his eyes couldn't help but sink. When he looked at Wei Wei, he brought out a cold intent. So what if she was his official wife? She was the princess of the Xianyuan kingdom, so she was naturally more noble than her. Furthermore, she had admired that person for a long time. Back then he was still a teenager. She had only taken one look at him from afar and fell for him. All these years, she had been waiting for an opportunity. Now that the opportunity had come, she would not give it up no matter what. Furthermore, as long as she could get close to that person, she was confident that he would see the good in her. At this thought, Zongjing Yu'er lifted her head and looked at Beligaju with sparkling eyes. That person seemed to be walking towards her. Zongjing Yu'er's heart was beating wildly, and her face was flushed. She was thinking about how she should respond if he were to speak to her. Lord Chun, who was beside her, said with a smile, "It seems that His Highness has also fallen for the princess. Otherwise, based on his character, he would not have come here personally." Zongjing Yu'er became even more embarrassed when she heard this. She felt that all her efforts were worth it. Beligaju was indeed walking toward her. He was wearing a black robe with exquisite workmanship. Even the sleeves were lined with silver embroidery, outlining the auspicious clouds. Everything about him showed his innate elegance and nobility. He was holding another cape in his hand. As he walked past the officials, the hubbub of voices gradually died down. Regardless of whether it was the envoys from the various countries or the exorcists, all of them could feel the powerful aura that was inherent in this man. It was as if they would blaspheme this celestial being just by saying a few words. It was not a complete celestial aura. There was also a dark aura that flowed around him. When such an aura was placed on a person who was full of self-restraint, it would only make it harder for people to look away. 3. Royal Family. Zongjing Yu'er's face was flushed red. Her voice was as sweet as melted candy. She raised her eyes and was about to meet Beligage's eyes. There was a cracking sound. It was as if something had broken beside her ear. Then there was a strong smell of blood. "Ah!" Lord Chen cried out in pain. He pressed on his broken right arm with his left hand. He was in so much pain that his forehead was dripping with cold sweat. Your Highness, why? What did I do wrong?" Why are you treating a loyal subject of the imperial court like this? Baligaju smiled. The wind blew at his long robe. It was a black cape with a raised collar made of silver fox fur. It complemented his handsome face and made him look even colder and more noble. He was like a noble who had been awakened from the darkness. His every move was filled with innate elegance, even if he did not look very approachable. A loyal subject of the imperial court? Do you think that I do not know that you accepted 1,000,000 taels of silver from the Xianyuan kingdom's envoy yesterday? What? Who would have thought that Lord Chun would? The officials started whispering to each other. Lord Chun was so frightened by his words that his face turned pale. Your Highness, please listen to my explanation, Your Highness. Yet Bailey Jiaju only took the white handkerchief and wiped the bloodstains on his fingers. He smiled devilishly and gracefully. You don't need to explain. I want to kill you, not because you took the money, but because you meddled in something you shouldn't have. Chapter 648. Swoosh. The white handkerchief was like a sharp knife that cut through his neck. Lord Chen's eyes widened in shock. Blood trickled down his hand. Lord Chen only touched it for a moment, before he fell backward. His whole body was convulsing, and his throat was gurgling. Then he tilted his head and stopped breathing. The shadow guards moved quickly. The moment Lord Chen fell, they dragged him away and cleaned up the bloodstains. They did not even blink during the entire process. The conservative ministers watched this scene with numbness in their scalps, and their hands started to tremble. His Highness had made his intentions clear. The only thing Lord Chun could interfere with was the marriage alliance. Lord Go was also dragged away like this. Zongjingyu heir was the closest to Lord Chun. The long dress that she had meticulously prepared was now stained with blood. She looked a little disheveled, but more than that, she was embarrassed. Her face was burning hot. Was he rejecting her? Baligaju took another step forward. He did not even look at the so-called princess. He grabbed the fur coat in his hand and covered Hellion Vivian's head with it. Then, he pulled her over with a cold expression. Who allowed you to show your face? Hellion Vivian tried to defend herself. This hat is blocking my view. Wear it even if it is blocking your view. Baligaju pressed down on the furry hair in front of him and looked in the direction of Zongjing Wenrun with his deep eyes. The light in his eyes was so cold that it seemed to have frozen. Zongjing Wenrun finally reacted. He had been staring at Hellion Vivian since the beginning. Zongjingyu air bit her thin lips and suddenly opened her mouth. Her soft voice was filled with persistence. Your Highness, no matter what decision you make, I want to tell you that I really like you. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she glanced at the man beside her and sighed in her heart. He was indeed a femme fatale. He had so many admirers. However, she was not afraid that he would waver. She would also find a few handsome men and see whose harem was stronger. Baligaju did not need to think to know what the little fox in front of him was thinking. He reached out and pinched her wrist. Using his strength, he lowered his voice and chuckled in her ear. With a warning tone, he said, If you dare to carry out the things in your mind, I will make you unable to even get out of bed. Hellion Vivian's back stiffened. Her small face was very sincere. I wasn't thinking about anything just now. Baligaju looked at her coldly, as if he was looking at an idiot. He said slowly, I am now your guardian demon. Do you think that I can't detect your stream of consciousness? Hellion Vivian. Fuck. This was already considered as spying on her privacy. In that case, would she not even be able to think of doing bad things in the future? How annoying. You can still do bad things. Bailey Jiaju lowered his head and kissed the corner of Wei Wei's mouth, as if there was no one else present. He didn't care in the slightest that someone was looking at them. He lowered his voice and whispered in her ear. However, you can only do it to me. You can do whatever you want, my master. Hellion Vivian. Don't speak in such a childish tone. Bailey Jiaju laughed, as if he enjoyed seeing Hellion Wei Wei's angry expression. Even that pair of unfathomable eyes became much brighter. Zongjingyu heir did not expect that her confession would be ignored just like that. That man had not even looked at her from the beginning to the end. Your Highness, why are you treating me like this? Am I wrong to like you? Zongjing Yuer's tears gushed out. She looked very beautiful as she cried. This made the envoys and exorcists from the other countries feel a little sad. A woman like her should be doted on. Even if the War Dragon Empire's third prince was unwilling to marry her, he should not have embarrassed her like this. When Beligaju heard this, he glanced at Zongjing Yuer. Zongjing Yuer seemed to have seen hope. Her eyes were still filled with tears as she raised her head with reddened eyes. Bailey Jiaju smiled. His etiquette was so graceful that no one could pick out the slightest mistake. You asked me where did you go wrong? I actually want to ask you. I don't like you. Yet you insist on sticking in front of me. What's the meaning of this? Are the women of the Xianyuan kingdom so lacking in love? Why do you have to interfere in other people's families? When the little one heard this, he took a step back. He had thought that if third sister-in-law wanted to fight, he would join in the fun. But now it seemed that third elder brother was going to flip out. It was better for him to stay away. When third elder brother was angry, it was definitely not something that ordinary people like him could accept. Take what he said just now as an example. Although it sounded nice, he only said one word throughout the whole process. Despicable. How could the people in the main hall not understand? When Zongjing Yuer heard what Beligaju said, her face turned green and white. Her body swayed, as if she was going to fall on the spot. She was a princess. When had she ever been humiliated like this? What did he think of her as? Of course, Elder Su Wu would not allow this to continue. Third prince, I thought that your country is a country of etiquette, so you should understand. I have the same thoughts as you, Elder Su Wu. Beligaju calmly interrupted him. His eyes were filled with coldness. As a country of etiquette, no country would send their princess out like a singer. Elder Su Wu, why don't you ask official Wang of the Huangzi country if his country would do the same? Of course not. Official Wang immediately denied. This was a matter of national pride. The smile on Bailey Jiaju's face widened. He was full of evil intentions as he said, Look, even the Huangzi nation would not do such a thing. But the Xianyuan nation did. I refused. And Elder Su Wu still wants to talk about etiquette with me. Ha! Bailey Jiaju didn't say the rest of the words, but almost everyone in the audience understood. What he meant was that the Xianyuan kingdom didn't deserve it. Elder Su Wu's face turned green. He clenched his fists and glared at official Wang, who had just spoken. Lord Wang finally realized that Bailey Jiaju was using him as a tool just now. Damn it. It was agreed that the three countries would work together to deal with the War Dragon dynasty. How did he end up helping Beligaju to deal with Elder Su Wu? This man. Official Wang could not think of any adjectives to describe Beligaju. He was dumbfounded. Helian Weiwei silently learned from the experience at the side. Before she met His Highness, she thought that she was shameless enough. But after meeting His Highness, she realized what it meant to be an expert. To scold someone, and even use an alliance's emissary as an excuse, it was really clever. No wonder His Highness always said that her methods were not ruthless enough. All she knew was to fight and kill. She did not know the ropes at all. Now, Helian Vivian finally understood what it meant to be ruthless. She looked at Elder Su Wu and Emissary Wang's expressions, then at Nailin Yuer's. How humiliating it must be to not be able to scream in pain. Chapter 649. If that's the case, let's not waste any more time. Zongjing Wenren stood up coldly and stared at Beligaju. Brother Beligaju, how do you plan to solve the seal? Once the divine exorcism seal is destroyed, not only the capital city, but the entire divine mainland will face the invasion of demons. Now that the envoys from the three countries are here, we have the ability to suppress the seal. You can do whatever you want if you refuse to let us settle in the capital city and reject the marriage alliance. However, this is a matter of great importance to the people of the world. We can't just do whatever you want. The War Dragon Empire has its own elder compound. Why don't we have a competition to see which country is better at yin and yang exorcism? The winner will guard the seal." When Wu Jing heard this, he said angrily, "Crown Prince Wenrun, who doesn't know that the Xianyuan kingdom is best at yin and yang exorcism? You're obviously doing this because you know we don't know how to exorcise demons. If you're so capable, let's have a martial qi competition." "General," Zongjing Wenrun laughed sarcastically, "the only way to deal with demons and resentful spirits is to use yin and yang exorcism. If you use martial qi to fight ghosts, you'll be the one who dies in the end." Wu Jing was speechless. He could only stare at Zongjing Wenrun, hating himself for not being able to use his strength. At this moment, the envoys from the other two countries spoke. "Crown Prince Wenrun is right. The royal family will compete fairly. The winner of 2 out of 3 rounds will guard the seal." While they were speaking, the exorcists behind them stood up and rotated their wrists. When they looked at Wu Jing, their eyes were filled with contempt. It was obvious that the other countries had come prepared. From the beginning, they had planned to use the competition as an excuse to send troops to the capital city. Everyone knew that the War Dragon Empire's elder compound had not recovered its power yet. It was impossible to find anyone who knew how to exorcise demons. The War Dragon Empire, which had the most say among the 4 countries, was now being suppressed by the other 3 countries. As a civil official, Lu Yu was anxious. Zongjing Wenrun raised his eyebrows and said slowly, "Brother Bailey, don't tell me you don't agree to this?" The exorcists laughed. It was obvious what they were laughing about. "Your Highness," a representative from the elder compound stood up. It was a young man. His eyes were burning with anger and he said, "I'll compete. I've learned the art of yin and yang." However, just by looking at his attire, one could tell that he was still a dabbler. The ministers all understood, and the young man who spoke also understood that he could not defeat the other party. But he could not let them come to his door and bully him. "All right." Elder Su Wu stroked his white beard and took a step forward. "Since someone has agreed to participate in the competition, let's decide on the candidates and the rules of the competition. We need to confirm this as soon as possible." When the officials heard this, they all looked at Beligaju. If His Highness agreed to the marriage, it would not be so difficult. But none of them dared to say it out loud, for fear that they would be killed on the spot. However, they already had a plan in mind. When the retired emperor returned, they would definitely report this matter to him. Not only did the 3rd princess consort's stomach not make a sound for so many months, but this time, His Highness even rejected the Xianyuan dynasty's marriage alliance because of her. They really didn't have the slightest bit of hope of winning this competition. At this thought, someone finally could not help but take a step forward and knelt on the ground loyally. He kowtowed heavily and said, "Your Highness, this old official has been an official for decades. On account of this old official's diligence and sincerity, this old official will only say one thing. The War Dragon dynasty has never been good at losing yin and yang. If we lose this competition, not only will we lose our reputation, but we will also lose the entire imperial city. This old official earnestly requests that Your Highness reconsider the marriage alliance with Princess Zongjing. This official also earnestly requests that Your Highness reconsider the marriage alliance with Princess Zongjing." Another person knelt down and kowtowed loudly on the ground. A smug smile appeared on Elder Su Wu's face. These old officials were still the most sensible. From beginning to end, Bailey Jiaju had been standing tall and straight, the corners of his mouth hooked up into an arc. At this time, when he heard the 2 ministers kowtowing, a cold light flashed through his eyes. It looked like he was about to make a move. Hellion Vivian tugged at his fur cloak and shook it with her head. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, revealing his demonic nature. "Why are you stopping me? Didn't you hear what they were saying, I said before, I will do the killing." Hellion Vivian looked up and smiled. She held his hand. "Your hands are so beautiful. You can't always fight and kill. Furthermore, those 2 people are Imperial Grandfather's people. How are you going to explain to Imperial Grandfather if you kill them?" Beligaju lowered his head and smiled. "Weiwei, you seem to have forgotten. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju said casually, I am a demon. It is only right for demons to kill. However, since you don't like such a bloody way of handling things, then forget it. Killing people is a waste of energy. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have bothered to kill them. It is not worth dirtying my hands. It will take a long time to wash them. Helene Vivian. Those are humans, not flies or mosquitoes. Can you not speak so casually? After Beligaju finished speaking, he let go of Helene Vivian's waist and walked towards the two officials. His eyes were deep and his voice was cold. Help these two officials up. Yes. The shadow guards stepped forward in unison. The two officials thought that the imperial family had finally thought it through, and their faces lit up with joy. Zongjing Yu glanced at Helene Vivian and said softly, I know he likes you, but Helene Vivian, you can't deny that if he marries me, I can solve all his problems. What about you? What can you do for him? When Helene Weiwei heard this sentence, her lips curved into a meaningful smile. Zongjing Yu was enraged by her smile. She took a deep breath and said, I don't want to make things too awkward. He will agree to marry me in a while. As long as you give up your position as the imperial concubine, I will guarantee that you will never. Before she could finish her sentence, Beligage's voice was like ice on the ground. It filled the entire hall. Don't you want to compete? Lord Qi, Lord Xie, just stand there and watch. Who says that the War Dragon dynasty will definitely lose? Zongjing Yu's face froze. She slowly turned her head and looked at Beligaju in disbelief. Even at this stage, he still refused to marry her. How could the War Dragon dynasty win in its current state? Zongjing Wenren's eyes turned cold. Lung Yi, go easy on him in the first round. He is a beginner. Teach him what exorcism is. Yes. Lung Yi the exorcist took a step forward. His face was full of disdain, as if he did not care about the young man at all. Chapter 650. The exorcists from the other two nations stepped forward as well. When they saw the young man sent by the War Dragon dynasty, they all sneered at him. Look at what he's wearing. I don't think he knows how to bind spirits. Haha, bind spirits. I think he might not even be able to detect where the ghost is. The exorcists laughed together. None of them were old in their 20s, but the power they exuded was not to be underestimated. The power of an exorcist was determined by the robes they wore and the items they carried on their backs. The more complete the set, the more powerful they were. Since the three nations had decided to join forces, the exorcists they sent were not to be trifled with. They were certain that no one in the War Dragon dynasty could deal with them. They had gone too far. The young man could not ignore the resentment and anger in his heart. However, now that he had stepped forward, he did not know what to do. Moreover, he could clearly feel how powerful the exorcists from the Xianyuan kingdom were. They carried dual swords, carried talismans, and even had spirit-binding ropes around their waists. The Xianyuan kingdom did not send their most powerful exorcists because the situation before them did not require their help. They were more than enough to deal with it. It would be a lie to say that he was not afraid. The young man was indeed a beginner. He had only seen what ghosts looked like when he was with the elders. Now that he was facing a real battle, he was not confident. However, he had to give it a try. The first round, spirit binding. This is the first step of exorcism. If you can't even complete this step, there's no need to mention protecting the divine exorcism seal. Elder Su Wu said as he glanced in the direction of the Battle Dragon dynasty. In all fairness, Lu Yu was anxious. He was really worried for the royal family. If this decision was not done well, the consequences would be unimaginable. The two old officials who persuaded Beligaju to marry seemed to have predicted the outcome. They shook their heads and sighed. Spirit binding, to put it bluntly, was to bind the spirits in place and control them, preventing them from harming others. It will be completed in half an incense stick's worth of time. In order to avoid any accidents, if anyone fails to restrain the vengeful ghost, this old man will personally take care of it. So everyone, There is no need to worry about anything happening. As Elder Suwu spoke, he took out a cosmos sack from his robes. This is the soul of a wild ghost who has been dead for less than half a year. We met her on our way here. She died in an accident and was affected by resentment. She is looking for a substitute everywhere. If we don't solve this problem soon, she will become a ferocious evil spirit in less than 3 months. What you need to do now is to restrain her, and the one who takes the least amount of time wins. That's it. Isn't it too simple? Lung Yi from the Xianyuan kingdom curled his lips in disdain. Elder Suwu stroked his white beard and smiled. To take care of the beginners, I don't want people to say that the Xianyuan kingdom is bullying others, just because we are exorcists. All right. Lung Yi shrugged. Elder Suwu turned his face to the side and continued. The 4 of you will form a circle and stand at the 4 corners of the circle. You should know that once a ghost is released, it will try its best to escape. When the time comes, whoever the female ghost runs to will be the one to restrain her. Do you understand? Understood. The exorcists from the 3 kingdoms answered firmly. Although the young man's face was pale, he still spoke up, albeit with a lack of confidence. Elder Suwu did not need to look to know that they would definitely win this round. The young man's panic was obvious. When the female ghost was released later, he might be so scared that he would not even dare to move. Alright, since everyone understands, let's begin. Elder Suwu reached out and placed the cosmos sack in the middle of the circle. After a while, the originally bulging cosmos sack began to rumble. Then, a strand of black hair crawled out from within. The black hair was dense and frightening. Then came the eyes, the bridge of the nose, and the mouth. As if she had finally found the exit, the female ghost quickly crawled out. If it were not for the fact that there were so many people around, the ministers would have run away. The scene in front of them was too frightening. The female ghost looked as if she had been crushed by something. First, she turned her head. Then with those hollow eyes, she stared in one direction and rushed over. Lung Yi spoke eloquently. Then he pointed his fingers and said, "Freeze!" The female ghost seemed to have been blocked. Knowing that she could not escape from this place, she bared her teeth and suddenly rushed back. The exorcists from Huangzi Kingdom did not expect the Yin energy on her body to be so strong. They almost lost control. But in the end, they managed to bind the female ghost to the spot. The ministers watched from the side with trembling hands. After all, once the female ghost rushed out, she would possess a human body. Once possessed, it would be easy to subdue her. Ghosts were different from humans, especially ghosts who had been dead for less than half a year. They relied on the breathing of humans to identify their location. Obviously, the female ghost was smart. After trying twice, she accurately sniffed out the location where the breathing was the heaviest and the defense was the weakest. She took 2 steps back, turned her head, and then twisted her body again. She looked in the direction of the young man, her eyes overflowing with thick black fog. Oh no! She's turning into a malicious spirit. Lu Yu watched from the periphery and could not help but stand up. Elder Suwu lowered his voice and said, "Calm down. She's just resentful because she couldn't break out of the encirclement. She hasn't reached the stage of becoming a malicious spirit yet." Lu Yu was still worried and looked at the young man. Not only was the young man's forehead covered in sweat, but his back was also wet. He repeated the incantation that Lung Yi and the others had seen just now. However, the female ghost was completely unaffected. She was only afraid at the beginning, but after tasting the sweetness, she suddenly rushed over and was about to bite the young man. A figure flashed in front of them. When the crowd regained their senses, Hellion Wei Wei had already dragged the young man to the side. Her hooded cloak covered her face, revealing only a pair of starry eyes. She looked down at the female ghost with an eerie aura. She did not recite the incantation. She only said 2 words, "Go back." Her voice was neither soft nor loud. The female ghost laughed sinisterly, as if she was mocking this human's stupidity. Her eyes were bloodshot as she reached out her black fingers and grabbed at Hellion Vivian. "You're a woman too. You can be my substitute. Ha 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 ha. When the crowd saw this, they thought that it was over. The third princess consort was definitely going to die. However, what no one expected was that Hellion Wei Wei actually stood there, her eyes sparkling, not moving at all, as if 10,000 ghosts couldn't invade her, as if she held the wind and clouds of the world in her palm. Her thin lips slightly opened, her fingertips emitting light, faintly able to hear her chanting, Lin Bing Do, Zhijie Zhen Lai in front. Chapter 651. Before Hellion Vivian could finish chanting the incantation, the female ghost seemed to have been frightened. She took a few steps back and stared at Hellion Vivian with wide eyes. She didn't dare to go forward, and half bent her knees, as if she was begging for mercy. Humans couldn't understand the ghost language, and could only hear the heavy breathing. However, looking at the female ghost's posture, it could be seen that she was very afraid of Hellion Vivian. This scene was completely out of everyone's expectations. Not only were the people from the War Dragon Empire shocked, even the exorcist named Lung Yi, who was standing beside Hellion Vivian, was so shocked that he couldn't say a word. If he didn't hear wrongly, the incantation that the other party was chanting was the 9 syllables mantra. How could the War Dragon Empire's third princess consort know the most authentic Tao of exorcism? Exorcism. Following Hellion Vivian's last 2 words, the female ghost collapsed onto the ground. The female ghost's body bent forward, and her entire body collapsed to the ground. Feeling the pain from her internal organs, she didn't dare to reach out her hand again. Everyone could see that if Lung Yi and the others could restrain the female ghost, then Hellion Vivian could make the female ghost afraid. She was so afraid that she didn't dare to move in the slightest. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hellion Wei Wei walked toward the female ghost. Don't come into close contact with her. Be careful of being possessed by her ghost. As if he was subdued by Hellion Vivian's Tao, Lung Yi reminded her as cold sweat broke out on his forehead. However, Hellion Vivian didn't stop. Her hooded cloak fluttered in the wind, looking free and easy. Looking at the female ghost, she still only said 2 words, but they seemed to carry the aura of sweeping away 1,000 soldiers. Go back. The female ghost didn't say anything. Looking left and right, she turned around and went back into the Qingquan pouch. Her speed was shockingly fast, even more anxious than when she came out. It was as if Hellion Vivian was some kind of scourge. To be able to force a ghost to this extent, they really hadn't seen it before. Everyone turned back to look at Hellion Vivian. Their faces were full of shock and amazement. Wu Jing was a boorish man. He laughed happily on the spot and said, Third princess consort, I didn't expect you to know how to exorcise demons. Hellion Vivian smiled. She had come into contact with Yuan Shao before. Oh no, before His Highness had completely awakened. When that female ghost appeared, it was basically a natural reaction. But what made her feel strange was that she could actually understand what the female ghost was saying. What the fuck is this? In the future, when she wanted to steal things at night, would there be countless ghosts whispering behind her, and she would be able to hear them? It all depends on whether you like it or not. If you don't want to hear it, you won't hear it. A familiar low voice sounded. It was the voice of a certain highness, and it even carried a mocking sneer. Hellion Vivian glanced at the seat of honor, and peeked at her thoughts again. Can't you give me some personal space? Elder Su Wu didn't expect things to turn out this way at all. His expression turned serious. Even the exorcists from the other neighboring countries had frozen expressions on their faces. The War Dragon Empire's elder compound had been severely damaged. They were not proficient in exorcism, so they were definitely weak in this aspect. It was because they had expected this that they decided to join forces with the 3 countries and come to the capital. But now, someone had actually recited the 9 symbolic words. And judging by the female ghost's reaction, this person's recitation of the 9 symbolic words seemed to be very powerful, because even they couldn't guarantee that the female ghost would be so fearful. It was as if there was something more evil than her here. There was indeed someone more evil than her here. Baligaju, who was sitting on the seat of honor. His face still carried a faint smile of elegance. Just behind Hellion Vivian, when no one was looking, a dangerous golden light slowly appeared in his dark eyes. It was also at that moment that the female ghost felt an aura that humans couldn't sense. She burrowed into the Qianquan bag and didn't dare to come out again. Of course, the female ghost wasn't sure what that aura was, but the fear that came from the depths of her bloodline told her to obey. No matter what, it looked like Hellion Vivian had won. But at this moment, Great Master Suwu opened his mouth and asked, "Who took the least time?" In other words, he was saying that the rule was that the one who took the least time would win. It was obvious that Lung Yi from the Xinyuan Kingdom had the advantage in this aspect. On the War Dragon Empire's side, the young man himself had already spent a lot of time resisting the female ghost. In addition, Hellion Vivian had saved the situation. "I'm sorry." The young man lowered his head and clenched his fists. Hellion Vivian smiled mischievously. "It's fine. This is just the first round. You can leave now. I'll take the rest of the competition." Is the War Dragon Empire planning to change the contestant? Elder Suwu smiled amiably. His gaze paused on Hellion Vivian for a moment before he said provocatively, "Third Princess Consort, you don't think that all exorcists in the Xinyuan Kingdom are of this standard, do you?" Hellion Vivian smiled, showing her white teeth in a dashing manner. "The War Dragon Empire isn't as simple as you think. Just now, your princess asked me if I could give anything to His Highness. I thought about it carefully. Other than giving him money to support him, I can also help him slap people's faces. For example, your country is a bully. You." For the first time in his life, Elder Suwu wanted to strangle someone to death. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly, as if she hadn't said those words. "Elder Suwu, don't be so agitated. You're an elder." Elder Suwu took a deep breath. Zhongjingyu Heir's little face was so angry that it looked like blood was about to drip out of it. Little Seven chewed on the meat bun and looked left and right. Then he scratched his head. Shouldn't the main point be, other than giving him money to support him? Why was the other party so angry? Shouldn't third brother be the one who should be angry? At that thought, the little one stole a glance at his third brother. As expected, Baligaju raised an eyebrow and ran his finger across his thin lips. He laughed evilly. "Give me money to support me, huh? Third brother." The little one squatted down and said seriously, "Third sister-in-law was just saying that casually." Baligaju glanced at him, then reached out and patted the little one's head. He had a mischievous expression on his face. "She can say that casually. How do you think I should punish her?" Hearing that, the little one immediately stopped talking. He lowered his bald head and looked at Hellion Vivian. He thought to himself, "Third sister-in-law, I've tried my best. Unfortunately, the enemy is too cunning." Hellion Vivian noticed the little one's gaze and glanced in his direction. She saw His Highness's half-smile and felt inexplicably scared. She began to communicate with the little one through her eyes. "What's going on?" The little one began to look up at the ceiling and moved his mouth behind him. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."